I
I
am
never thought
Lauren,
I'd be
33
here,
years old,
sharing
and my
this.
husband thought
It's
he
been
had
a long
orchestrated the
journey,
perfect
but I'm
crime.
finally ready to tell
He
you
secretly
everything.
buried a biometric locked case inside my checked luggage right before our international flight to Dubai. He assumed his boring, predictable wife would simply carry his felonies across the world without asking questions. What he did not anticipate was that I would find his little black box, bypass his security, and quietly slip it into the bottom of his mistress's designer tote bag just moments before the security checkpoint. She was the one who paid the ultimate price, and he was forced to watch it happen. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever used your own intelligence to outsmart someone who tried to destroy your life. The chaotic hum of Chicago O'Hare International Airport usually triggers a bit of travel anxiety, but today my pulse was frighteningly steady. I sat in the plush leather chair of the first-class departure lounge, sipping sparkling water and watching the man I had been married to for 6 years. Bradley, a 36-year-old regional sales director for a massive pharmaceutical corporation, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. He flashed me his signature charismatic smile, the one that had originally convinced me to pay off his massive student debt while I worked 60 hours a week as a financial compliance auditor. He kissed my forehead, telling me he was going to grab us some artisan coffees from the concourse before boarding our 14-hour flight to the United Arab Emirates. This trip was supposedly a mix of his corporate conference and a luxury vacation for us to reconnect. I waited exactly 2 minutes before standing up and following him out of the lounge. I did not follow him because I was a jealous wife. I followed him because I already knew exactly what he was doing. I blended into the crowd of rushing travelers, keeping my distance, as Bradley bypassed the coffee shops completely. Instead, he made a beeline for a secluded corner near a high-end, duty-free boutique. Standing there clutching an oversized Christian Dior tote bag and pretending to browse luxury perfumes was Sienna. She was 26 years old, Bradley's new public relations assistant, and an aspiring lifestyle influencer who made sure everyone in his office knew about her expensive tastes. I stood behind a display of sunglasses and watched the scene unfold. Bradley walked right up to her, casually wrapping his hand around her waist, his fingers slipping down to rest intimately on her lower back. He leaned in, whispering something into her ear that made her giggle and playfully swat his chest. He kissed her neck right there in the middle of Terminal 5, completely unbothered by the risk. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was a genius playing a grand game with two oblivious women. He had no idea that I was already 5 steps ahead of his entire operation. To understand why I was standing in an airport watching my husband kiss his assistant without shedding a single tear, you have to rewind exactly 12 hours. The night before our flight, our Chicago townhouse was perfectly quiet. Bradley had gone out to a so-called late-night strategy meeting, leaving me to finish the packing. I have built my entire career as a financial compliance auditor around finding anomalies. My brain is hardwired to notice when numbers do not add up, when spreadsheets are altered, and when things are deliberately hidden. That professional intuition does not just turn off when I clock out of the office. I had finished packing my large silver hard-shell suitcase around 8 p.m. Out of habit, I weighed it on our digital luggage scale. It clocked in at exactly 42.5 pounds. I left it open on the guest room bed and went to take a long shower. When I returned an hour later, Bradley was home humming a cheerful tune as he poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon in the kitchen downstairs. I went back into the guest room to zip up my suitcase. As I lifted it off the bed to place it on the floor, my muscles registered a subtle, undeniable difference. It was heavier. Not by much, but enough to trigger a massive alarm in my auditor brain. I placed the bag back on the digital scale. The red numbers flashed 45.8 pounds. My suitcase had magically gained over 3 pounds while I was washing my hair. I unzipped the bag and meticulously went through my clothes, my shoes, my toiletries. Nothing had been added to the main compartments. The visual inventory perfectly matched what I had packed. but the weight discrepancy was an undeniable fact. I ran my hands along the interior lining of the suitcase. The fabric at the bottom felt unusually taut, pressing against the polycarbonate shell in a way it had not an hour ago. My breathing slowed as I realized the terrifying implication. Someone had tampered with my luggage in my own home. I walked to my sewing kit, pulled out a small, sharp seam ripper, and carefully sliced open the heavy fabric lining at the bottom of the suitcase. I peeled back the material and stared into the dark cavity in absolute silence. Wedged perfectly between the metal handlebars of the suitcase frame was a sleek, matte black case. It was about the size of a thick hardcover book, completely unmarked and clearly designed to evade casual inspection. I pulled it out. It was heavy, made of high-grade aluminum, and featured no keyhole or combination lock. Instead, a small glowing square sat on the front right corner, a biometric fingerprint scanner. I sat on the floor of the guest room, the cold metal of the case resting in my lap. My husband, a pharmaceutical executive, had secretly sliced open my luggage, hidden a biometric safe inside, and hastily glued the lining back together right before we were scheduled to fly to Dubai. The United Arab Emirates has some of the most unforgiving draconian customs laws on the planet. Smuggling illicit items there does not just get you a slap on the wrist, it gets you decades in a foreign prison. And Bradley had chosen to plant this unknown massive risk in my checked bag under my name attached to my passport. If customs pulled my bag aside, I would be the one taking the fall while he walked away completely clean. The betrayal was so profound, so violently callous, that it bypassed sadness entirely and mutated straight into cold, calculated rage. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs to confront him. Confrontation would only lead to his pathetic gaslighting, endless denials, and him finding another sneaky way to execute his plan. Instead, I stood up, walked into the hallway, and looked down at the kitchen. Bradley had finished his bourbon and left his crystal glass sitting on the granite countertop. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I stared at the black biometric lock, my mind operating with the sterile precision of a forensic audit. Emotion was a liability right now. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. Bradley was downstairs in our kitchen pouring himself a drink and completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was treating our guest room like a crime scene. I needed to get inside that box. I slipped off my shoes and crept down the carpeted stairs, avoiding the creaky floorboard on the fourth step. I approached the granite island where he had just finished his expensive bourbon. He had left his crystal glass sitting under the dim glow of the pendant lights. Condensation had gathered near the base, but the middle of the heavy glass was completely dry. Right there, perfectly illuminated by the ambient kitchen light, was a pristine thumbprint pressed firmly into the crystal. My husband had always been a man of predictable habits. He held his glass exactly the same way every single time. I moved to the junk drawer by the refrigerator, sliding it open with agonizing slowness to avoid making a single sound. I bypassed the scissors and loose batteries, my fingers closing around a roll of wide, transparent packing tape. I grabbed a soft makeup brush from my purse on the entryway table and a small packet of loose graphite powder I kept in the utility closet for lubricating door hinges. My heart beat in a steady, methodical rhythm against my ribs. I was no longer Lauren, the devoted wife preparing for a romantic getaway. I was Lauren, the senior compliance auditor, conducting the most critical investigation of my entire life. I returned to the kitchen island. Taking a tiny pinch of the graphite powder, I used the soft bristles of the makeup brush to lightly dust the curved surface of the crystal glass. Bradley's thumbprint immediately sprang into sharp relief, the dark powder clinging perfectly to the invisible oils left behind by his skin. I tore off a small square of the packing tape, held my breath, and pressed it smoothly over the dusted print. I rubbed my fingernail over the tape to ensure a perfect transfer, then peeled it back in one swift motion. There it was, the biometric key to Bradley's little black box, captured perfectly on the adhesive surface. I quietly made my way back upstairs, expertly avoiding the creaky floorboard on the staircase. I slipped back into the guest bedroom and locked the door behind me. The sleek aluminum case sat on the carpet, looking dangerously out of place among my folded sweaters. I knelt beside it, my hands remarkably steady. I took the piece of packing tape and carefully aligned the captured graphite thumbprint over the glowing biometric scanner on the corner of the box. The scanner emitted a faint blue searching light. I pressed my own thumb over the tape, applying firm, even pressure to mimic the heat and weight of a human digit. For 2 agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing happened. My mind raced through alternative plans, wondering if I would need to break out a heavy power drill and destroy the casing entirely. Then the square sensor flashed a vibrant green. A soft mechanical click echoed in the quiet room. The internal locking mechanism had disengaged. Bradley had vastly underestimated my resourcefulness and my nerve. I unlatched the heavy metal clasps and slowly opened the lid. What I saw inside made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. The interior was lined with dense, shock-absorbing foam custom cut to hold its contents securely. Nestled tightly into the foam were dozens of identical, unmarked amber pill bottles. I pulled one out and twisted off the child-proof cap. Inside were hundreds of small, professionally pressed blue and white tablets. As a pharmaceutical executive's wife, I had attended enough industry dinners to know exactly what I was looking at. These were not generic supplements or harmless vitamins. These were uncut prescription-grade oxycodone and fentanyl pills. My husband was not just hiding dirty secrets. He was trafficking highly lethal narcotics. And he had planned to use my luggage to transport them across international borders. If a customs dog in Dubai had flagged my suitcase, if an airport X-ray machine had caught the unusual density of this metal box, I would have been handcuffed and thrown to the ground on the spot. I would have faced a terrifying foreign justice system, completely alone, staring down a mandatory life sentence, or worse. Meanwhile, Bradley would have acted horrified, shedding crocodile tears and claiming he had absolutely no idea what his criminal wife was up to. He had weaponized my completely clean background and my innocent demeanor to act as his unwitting drug mule. But the pills were only half of the story. I dug deeper into the metal case, pulling out the bottles to see what lay hidden beneath the thick layer of foam padding. At the very bottom of the case, strapped down securely with a heavy Velcro band, was a solid-state encrypted hard drive. It was a heavy military-grade electronic device, the exact kind corporate executives use when handling highly classified intellectual property. I stared at the blinking indicator light on its side, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly clicking into a horrifyingly clear picture. Bradley had been complaining loudly for months about being passed over for a major promotion at his pharmaceutical firm. He had ranted endlessly about how much money the company was making off his regional sales strategies, while giving him a pathetic fraction of a percent in performance bonuses. He felt entitled to massive wealth that his salary simply did not provide. This hard drive undoubtedly contained stolen trade secrets, proprietary chemical formulas, and confidential research data ripped straight from his employer's highly secure servers. The narcotics were likely just a high-value sweetener, a lucrative side deal to prove his worth to whatever black market syndicate or rival corporation he was meeting in the United Arab Emirates. Bradley was committing severe corporate espionage and international drug trafficking in one single trip. He had meticulously orchestrated a massive payday, planning to cash out in a country where the money could be easily hidden in untraceable offshore accounts. And I was nothing but his convenient disposable cargo carrier. He was willing to sacrifice my freedom, my career, and my entire life, just to ensure his illicit payload made it through customs completely undetected. I sat on the floor of the guest bedroom, surrounded by the physical evidence of my husband's absolute depravity. A weaker woman might have panicked. A different wife might have confronted him right then, screaming and throwing the pill bottles at his lying head. But I am an auditor. When I find fraud, I do not alert the fraudster to my discovery. I document the evidence, I build an airtight case, and then I let them walk blindly into their own total destruction. I knew exactly how to pack this back up, and I knew exactly whose bag it was going into tomorrow at the airport. Fast forward to the present moment, at O'Hare Terminal 5. I stood up from my plush leather seat in the first-class departure lounge, leaving my sparkling water behind. My heavy leather carry-on tote bag hung securely over my shoulder. Inside it, wrapped carefully in a thick cashmere sweater, was the aluminum case. I had removed it from my checked luggage late last night, seamlessly restitching the lining so Bradley would never know it was missing until we reached Dubai. If the case had gone into the cargo hold under my name, I would have zero control over the situation upon arrival. Customs could have randomly flagged my bag, and the game would be over before I even had a chance to play my hand. So I kept the contraband close. Bradley thought his illicit payload was safely resting in the belly of the plane. He was completely wrong. I walked deliberately toward the duty-free boutique where Bradley and Sienna were having their hidden rendezvous. I stayed entirely out of their direct line of sight, seeking refuge behind a towering display of high-end cosmetics. Bradley checked his designer watch, gave Sienna one last lingering kiss on the cheek, and turned to head toward the artisan coffee shop on the main concourse. This was my window of opportunity. Sienna remained near the brightly lit perfume counters. She pulled out her phone, immediately extending her arm to find the absolute perfect angle for a selfie. She pouted her lips, holding up a bottle of expensive fragrance, completely absorbed in curating her fake glamorous life for her social media followers. Resting on the polished tile floor right beside her designer heels was her oversized Christian Dior tote bag. It was aggressively large, the kind of accessory people carry when they desperately want everyone to know exactly how much money they spent on it. And just as I had anticipated, the top zipper was completely open, revealing a chaotic, unorganized mess of makeup bags, travel magazines, and neck pillows. I adjusted the heavy strap of my own bag and stepped out from behind the cosmetic display. I walked with the brisk, highly focused pace of a typical business traveler, rushing to reach their gate. As I approached Sienna from behind, I smoothly slipped the sweater-wrapped aluminum case out of my tote. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained absolutely steady. Years of conducting surprise corporate audits had taught me exactly how to mask my nerves and project total calm under immense pressure. I brushed closely past Sienna, intentionally allowing my right shoulder to bump lightly against hers. She stumbled forward a fraction of an inch, her phone dipping as she let out a loud, annoyed sigh. In that split second of her total distraction, I dropped the heavy metal case straight into the yawning mouth of her Dior bag. It slid smoothly past her glossy travel magazines and nestled perfectly into the bottom fabric with a dull, muffled thud. I did not break my stride for even a second. I offered a quick, breezy apology over my shoulder, blending seamlessly into a massive group of international travelers heading toward the terminal exit. Sienna simply rolled her eyes, adjusted her hair, and went right back to taking photos, completely unaware that she was now carrying enough Class A narcotics to secure a mandatory life sentence in a Middle Eastern prison. I circled back through the terminal and returned to the first-class lounge, sitting down in my original chair just seconds before Bradley appeared. He approached with a bright, charming smile, holding 2 steaming cups of expensive artisan coffee. He handed me a vanilla latte, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire criminal enterprise had just been relocated. I looked up at him and offered my warmest, most loving smile in return. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee and thanked him, leaning into his touch when he affectionately brushed a stray strand of hair behind my ear. It was a flawless, Oscar-worthy performance. If he could play the devoted, caring husband while secretly planning to sacrifice my freedom and my life, I could certainly play the oblivious, adoring wife while actively orchestrating his absolute downfall. A few minutes later, the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal speakers. Bradley took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring, as he guided me forward. We walked toward the gate together, projecting the perfect image of a successful, happy couple embarking on a luxury getaway. The boarding process was incredibly tense, a slow, shuffling march down the narrow jet bridge that felt like walking toward an inevitable explosion. Every time a security agent or gate attendant glanced our way, I felt a phantom spike of adrenaline course through my veins. But Bradley was effortlessly cool and collected. He joked lightly with the flight attendants greeting us at the door, stowed my carry-on bag in the overhead bin with practiced ease, and settled comfortably into his spacious first-class pod. I sat in the luxurious seat right next to him, fastening my seatbelt and listening to the safety briefing playing on the monitors. Bradley reached over the center console and squeezed my knee. He whispered that he could not wait to show me the incredible views from our five-star hotel suite. I smiled back, mirroring his enthusiastic energy flawlessly. I told him I was looking forward to every single minute of this amazing trip. My voice was incredibly smooth, betraying absolutely none of the cold, calculated fury burning fiercely inside me. As the massive plane accelerated down the runway and lifted heavily into the sky, Bradley closed his eyes and leaned back against his headrest, a smug, arrogant look of satisfaction settling on his face. He truly believed he had won. He believed his stolen corporate data and illegal narcotics were safely resting in the cargo hold below us, securely registered under my innocent name. He had absolutely no idea that his precious, highly illegal payload was currently sitting just a few rows behind us in the premium economy cabin, tucked safely inside the designer tote bag of his naive young mistress. I turned my head to look out the window, watching the sprawling Chicago skyline shrink beneath the dense clouds. The trap was set. The bait was in place. All I had to do now was wait for the jaws to snap shut. 14 hours later, the massive aircraft tires slammed against the tarmac of Dubai International Airport. The transition from the isolated climate-controlled bubble of the first-class cabin to the stark reality of the United Arab Emirates felt incredibly jarring. As we disembarked, the atmosphere inside the terminal was immaculate, silent, and heavily monitored. Dubai Customs does not operate with the casual, hurried indifference of American airports. They operate with military precision. Highly trained officers in pristine uniforms stood at every checkpoint, their eyes scanning the crowds with predatory focus. Automated facial recognition cameras tracked our every move from high above. The air smelled of expensive oud and sterile cleaning supplies. Bradley grabbed my hand, his palm slightly sweaty, though he maintained his relaxed, confident stride. He led us through the expedited premium lanes, completely unaware that his entire life was about to violently derail. We cleared passport control with zero issues. The border agent stamped our documents, welcomed us to the country, and waved us through to the secondary screening and baggage claim area. Bradley let out a subtle, heavy sigh of relief. He thought the most dangerous part of his journey was over. He assumed his locked aluminum case was currently tumbling down the luggage carousel, completely undetected inside my silver suitcase. We stood near the edge of the security scanning zone, waiting for our bags to appear. I positioned myself strategically, ensuring I had a completely unobstructed view of the X-ray conveyor belts, where the economy passengers were now being funneled for their mandatory carry-on inspections. A few minutes later, Sienna strutted into the inspection area. She looked exhausted from the long flight, but was still desperately clinging to her curated influencer persona. She wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors, tapping away on her phone, completely oblivious to the intense scrutiny of the customs agents surrounding her. Her massive Christian Dior tote bag hung heavily off her right shoulder. From across the hall, I watched Bradley subtly track her movements out of the corner of his eye. A tiny, arrogant smirk played on his lips. He was enjoying the thrill of having his wife and his mistress in the same room, completely confident that neither woman had any idea about the other. He felt like an absolute god among men, fully believing he had outsmarted every single person in his life. Sienna reached the front of the security line. A stern-faced customs officer gestured for her to place her belongings onto the conveyor belt. She huffed, visibly annoyed by the inconvenience, and carelessly dropped the heavy tote bag onto the moving rollers. She walked through the metal detector without a second glance. The Dior bag glided smoothly into the X-ray machine. I held my breath, my fingernails digging sharply into my own palms. The conveyor belt hummed quietly for 3 seconds. Then the heavy rubber flaps of the machine jerked to a sudden, violent halt. The security officer staring at the monitor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing sharply at the screen. He hit a bright red button on his console. Instantly, a piercing, high-pitched electronic alarm echoed through the cavernous hall. The sound was deafening, cutting through the low murmur of the airport like a jagged knife. Within seconds, the atmosphere completely transformed from orderly transit to a highly coordinated tactical response. 4 heavily armed security agents materialized from the surrounding corridors, swarming Sienna's position and physically blocking her from moving another inch. Sienna froze, her phone slipping from her manicured hand and clattering loudly onto the polished marble floor. A senior customs official, flanked by 2 armed guards, marched over to the X-ray machine. He pulled the Dior bag off the belt and slammed it onto the metal inspection table. He demanded Sienna open the bag immediately. She was trembling violently now, her previous entitlement completely evaporating into pure terror. She stammered, claiming it was just her makeup and magazines. The official ignored her protests, plunging his gloved hands deep into the designer tote. When he pulled his hands back out, he was holding the heavy, matte, black biometric case. Sienna stared at it, genuine confusion washing over her face. She had absolutely no idea what it was or how it got there. The officer demanded she unlock it. When she cried hysterically that it did not belong to her, a security technician stepped forward with a specialized pry bar. With a brutal metallic crunch, he forced the aluminum hinges apart. The case sprang open. The custom foam insert dislodged, and dozens of unmarked amber pill bottles spilled aggressively across the stainless steel table. The child-proof caps popped off upon impact, sending hundreds of deadly uncut fentanyl and oxycodone tablets raining onto the floor. Right beneath the cascading pills, the heavy encrypted hard drive lay completely exposed. The sheer gravity of the crime instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room: drug trafficking and corporate espionage. In Dubai, this was a guaranteed life sentence, perhaps even worse. A guard immediately grabbed Sienna, twisting her arms forcefully behind her back and slapping heavy metal handcuffs onto her wrists. She began to scream. It was a guttural, primal sound of absolute, unadulterated panic. She thrashed against the guards, her designer sunglasses flying off her face and shattering on the ground. In her blind terror, her eyes frantically scanned the crowd of shocked onlookers and locked directly onto Bradley. We were standing less than 30 feet away. Sienna lunged in our direction, fighting hopelessly against the officers holding her down. She screamed his name at the top of her lungs. She begged him to help her. She shrieked to the heavily armed police that he was her boss, that they were traveling together, and that the black bag was his property. I turned to look at my husband. The arrogant, untouchable corporate executive was completely gone. All the color drained rapidly from Bradley's face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. He took a massive, stumbling step backward, physically recoiling from the woman he had been kissing just 15 hours earlier. 2 customs officials turned their piercing glares toward him, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Bradley threw his hands up in the air, his voice cracking with cowardly desperation. He looked directly at the authorities and shouted with absolute conviction, "I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. She is crazy. I have never seen her before in my life." He threw her to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. He sacrificed his devoted mistress to save his own skin, exactly as he had planned to sacrifice me. I immediately grabbed Bradley's arm, digging my fingers into his expensive suit jacket. I widened my eyes, let my jaw drop, and put on the performance of a lifetime. I played the role of the terrified, bewildered wife to absolute perfection, clinging to my husband for protection. I watched silently as Sienna was dragged away by airport security, sobbing uncontrollably as she was hauled off to face a foreign prison. The jaws of the trap had finally snapped shut, and the sound of it was utterly magnificent. The cab ride from the airport to our 5-star resort on the Palm Jumeirah was suffocatingly silent. Bradley sat rigid against the leather seat, staring blankly out the tinted window at the towering glass skyscrapers of Dubai. The color had not returned to his face since we left the customs checkpoint. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. I maintained my act perfectly periodically, reaching over to squeeze his hand, offering terrified whispers about how crazy that poor woman at the airport had acted. He barely acknowledged my touch, nodding mechanically, while his mind desperately tried to calculate the damage. He thought his master plan was still safe inside my luggage, securely stowed in the trunk of the car. He had no idea his entire world had already burned to the ground. We arrived at the opulent resort and were swiftly escorted to our penthouse suite. The room was a masterpiece of Middle Eastern luxury, featuring gold leaf accents, soaring ceilings, and a massive balcony overlooking the glittering Persian Gulf. A uniformed bellboy wheeled my silver hardshell suitcase and Bradley's leather duffel bag into the grand foyer. Bradley handed him a crumpled tip with a violently trembling hand and essentially shoved the man out the door. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, locking us inside. In an instant, the suave, charismatic pharmaceutical executive completely evaporated. The mask dropped, revealing the feral, panicking animal beneath. Bradley lunged at my silver suitcase with the ferocity of a starving predator. He did not bother setting it carefully on the velvet luggage rack. He threw it flat onto the polished marble floor and yanked the zippers apart so hard the metal tabs warped and snapped. "Bradley, what are you doing?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of startled confusion into my voice. "You are ruining my clothes." He completely ignored me. He shoved his hands violently into my neatly folded blouses, tossing expensive silk and cashmere over his shoulder like garbage. He dug straight to the bottom of the suitcase, his fingers clawing at the thick interior lining. I watched his broad shoulders tense as his hands met nothing but the flat polycarbonate shell of the luggage frame. He froze. His breathing became ragged and shallow, echoing loudly in the cavernous quiet suite. He ripped the lining open further, pulling the fabric apart at the seams, frantically patting down every square inch of the internal casing. He was hunting for the heavy aluminum biometric lockbox he had personally glued inside exactly 18 hours ago. He came up completely empty. The black case was gone. Bradley rocked back onto his heels, his chest heaving heavily. He stared at the empty, gutted suitcase as if it were a terrifying optical illusion. Then he slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with a terrifying mixture of absolute dread and simmering rage. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. I took a deliberate step backward, clutching my purse tightly to my chest, playing the role of the intimidated spouse. "Where is what, Bradley? You are scaring me. What are you looking for?" He scrambled to his feet, kicking a pile of my scattered dresses out of his way. He closed the distance between us in 3 massive strides, looming over me with an aggressive, domineering posture. "Do not play stupid with me, Lauren. My black case. Where is the black case that was packed in your bag?" "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," I replied, my voice trembling with practiced innocent panic. "I packed this suitcase myself last night. There was no black case in there. Did you put something in my luggage without telling me?" "Yes, I put my highly classified corporate documents in there," he screamed, spraying a fine mist of saliva into the air. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff collar. "It was a secure biometric vault containing proprietary data for my regional directors meeting. It is worth millions of dollars in corporate assets and you lost it." The audacity of his gaslighting was almost breathtaking. He had intended to use me as a human shield to smuggle lethal narcotics and stolen intellectual property into a country with zero tolerance for criminals. Now that his plan had failed, he was instantly attempting to rewrite reality, making me the incompetent wife who had somehow misplaced his invaluable corporate property. He needed someone to blame, and I was the only target left in the room. "I did not lose anything," I countered, allowing a few realistic tears to well up in my eyes. "I never saw a black case, Bradley. Why would you hide something so important in the bottom of my checked bag instead of carrying it with you?" "Because you are supposed to be reliable," he roared, pacing frantically across the expensive Persian rug. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive product. "I trusted you to handle the simple logistics of this trip while I managed the massive global deals keeping this family afloat. You must have taken it out. You unpacked it because you are obsessed with weighing your bags like a paranoid accountant. Or you left the suitcase unlocked and airport security confiscated it. He was spinning wildly out of control, throwing accusations at the wall to see what would stick. An auditor knows that panic is the first symptom of guilt. When the books do not balance, the fraudster always attacks the investigator. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to doubt my own memory and apologize for a mistake I never made. He wanted me broken and compliant so he could figure out how to save his own skin without me asking inconvenient questions. I did not take anything out, I said, maintaining my icy composure beneath the facade of a distressed wife. I kept my face soft, but my mind was evaluating his every move with clinical precision. Maybe the baggage handlers in Chicago flagged it during the X-ray scan. If it looked suspicious, they might have opened the lining and confiscated it before the bag even made it onto the plane. Bradley stopped pacing immediately. The remaining color drained from his face. The implication of my words hit him like a freight train. If American federal authorities had confiscated the case in Chicago, they already had the fentanyl and the stolen hard drive. They would be tracing the origin right now. He was currently standing in a foreign country, but his entire life back home could be completely dismantled by the time our return flight landed. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the device. He turned his back to me, furiously typing out messages, likely trying to reach his underworld contacts or his corrupt corporate buyers to warn them that the payload was missing. I stood quietly amid the wreckage of my torn suitcase and scattered clothing. I wiped away my fake tears, watching the man who had promised to love and protect me utterly destroy himself from the inside out. He thought he was the mastermind. He thought he was in control. But as he stared at his screen in panicked silence, I knew the truth. I was the one holding all the cards, and the game had only just begun. The silence in the penthouse was shattered when Bradley violently hurled his phone against the velvet sofa. It bounced off the plush cushions and clattered loudly onto the polished marble floor. He turned back to me, his chest heaving with exertion, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. The frantic panic he had displayed just moments ago had completely morphed into a desperate, vicious need to inflict pain. "You ruined everything," he hissed, marching toward me until he was close enough that I could smell the stale airplane coffee on his breath. "One simple job. All you had to do was bring your suitcase from point A to point B like a normal functioning adult, but you could not even manage that." I let the facade of the frightened, confused wife slip just a fraction. I straightened my posture, refusing to shrink under his looming shadow. I tightened my grip on my purse, anchoring myself in the present reality. "Do not speak to me about being a functioning adult, Bradley," I said, my voice eerily calm against his escalating volume. I packed my belongings. I carried my bag. If you decided to secretly treat my luggage like a corporate courier service without my consent, that is entirely your failure. You took a risk, and it backfired. "A risk," he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. He paced over to the minibar, gripping the granite counter so hard his knuckles turned white. "It was a guaranteed success until you ruined it. You are a liability, Lauren. You have always been a liability, dragging me down." My jaw clenched. The absolute audacity of this man was staggering. My voice hardened, dropping into an icy, commanding register. "Do not ever lecture me about being a liability. Have you conveniently forgotten how you got to this penthouse suite? How you secured that regional director title in the first place?" He scoffed, crossing his arms in a rigid defensive posture. I did not let him interrupt. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, forcing him to look me in the eye. "I worked 60-hour weeks for 4 solid years," I stated, making sure every single word landed like a physical blow. "I audited endless corporate spreadsheets until my vision blurred. I took double shifts during tax season. I did all of that so I could single-handedly pay off your massive student loans. You were drowning in 6-figure debt when I married you, Bradley. Your credit score was garbage. You were living in a studio apartment, barely making rent." He rolled his eyes, looking away toward the balcony, but I refused to let him escape the truth. I kept my tone perfectly even, laying out the facts like I was presenting an audit report to a board of directors. While you were out playing golf with the vice presidents, buying expensive rounds of drinks at the country club to secure your promotions, I was the one eating cheap takeout in a fluorescent-lit cubicle. I funded your entire ascension up the corporate ladder. I paid for the tailored suits you wear. I built the financial foundation you are standing on right now. You are a self-made man only because I made you. Bradley let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It was a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the gold leaf walls of the luxurious suite. The true narcissist within him finally stepped completely into the light, shedding any remaining pretense of husbandly affection. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with absolute disgust, stripping away years of our shared history in a single sweeping glance. "You think paying a few bills makes you some kind of martyr?" He sneered, his upper lip curling into a cruel smirk. "You did that because it is the exact only thing you are good at, Lauren. You are a boring, rigid accountant. You live your entire pathetic life on a spreadsheet. There is no passion in you, no spontaneity, no spark whatsoever. You are practically a robot operating on a fixed schedule." I stood my ground, absorbing his verbal assault with clinical detachment. Every vicious insult he hurled at me was simply another piece of evidence confirming that my meticulously executed revenge was completely justified. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping into a cruel, venomous tone intended to shatter my self-esteem. "Look at yourself. You wear the same drab conservative suits every single day. You keep your hair in the same practical style because you are too afraid to take a risk. You calculate every single penny we spend and every single calorie you consume. You do not know how to actually live, and you certainly do not know how to be a real wife." He was projecting his desires for Sienna onto me, contrasting my dependable nature with the flashy, glamorous influencer persona he had been chasing. He wanted a trophy, not a partner. "A real wife supports her husband unconditionally," he spat out, pointing an aggressive finger at my chest. "A real wife understands that men like me, men who actually build global empires and take massive risks, need excitement. We need women who know how to dress, how to entertain, how to make us feel alive and powerful. All you do is nag me about household budgets and corporate compliance regulations. You are entirely suffocating." He was regurgitating every toxic insecurity he thought I harbored. He wanted to break me down so I would apologize, so I would scramble to prove my worth to him by helping him fix his current disaster. But instead of crying, I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of liberation. He was showing me his true nature. He felt absolutely zero gratitude for my sacrifices. To him, I was nothing but a human ATM and a convenient, legally binding cover story. I stared right into his angry, pathetic eyes, keeping my expression perfectly blank. "If I am so suffocating and rigid, Bradley, why did you insist on bringing me on this luxury romantic getaway in the first place?" "Because you are my wife," he snapped, completely missing the heavy irony of his own words. "Because having a stable spouse looks good for the company board members. It projects reliability. It shows I am a grounded family man. But clearly bringing you was the biggest mistake of my entire career. You are entirely useless to me now." I nodded slowly, letting his vicious words wash over me without letting them penetrate my armor. He turned his back to me again, pacing the length of the extravagant room, muttering curses under his breath as he tried to formulate a new strategy. I watched his broad shoulders tense as he picked up his phone from the floor, his thumbs flying across the shattered screen in a desperate bid for salvation. He was a rat trapped in a maze of his own design, entirely oblivious to the walls closing in. He thought he had just won the argument. He thought he had successfully put me in my place by crushing my spirit. He had absolutely no idea that while he was insulting my wardrobe and my personality, the Dubai police were already building a severe criminal profile with his name written at the very top of it. The silence in the room was abruptly shattered by the sharp, piercing ringtone of Bradley's phone. He flinched, nearly dropping the device he had just retrieved from the floor. He stared at the glowing screen, his face turning an even paler shade of white. It was an unknown local Dubai number. He looked at me, panic flaring in his eyes, and then back to the screen. He knew exactly who was calling. I stepped forward, my voice leaving no room for argument. Answer it, Bradley, and put it on speaker. I want to hear exactly what kind of disaster you have dragged us into. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the accept button. He knew that ignoring a call from the local authorities would immediately trigger an international manhunt. With a trembling finger, he accepted the call and activated the speakerphone, placing the device carefully on the marble coffee table between us. Mr. Bradley, a deep accented voice echoed through the pristine suite. This is Detective Al Mansouri with the Dubai Police Force Criminal Investigation Department. We require your immediate cooperation regarding a security incident at the airport. Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Of course, Detective. How can I assist you? Is there a problem with my corporate team? We currently hold a female American citizen in our custody, Detective Al Mansouri stated, his tone completely devoid of emotion. Her passport identifies her as Sienna. She was apprehended attempting to smuggle a massive quantity of prohibited narcotics alongside an encrypted electronic hard drive. During her interrogation, she explicitly named you as the owner of the contraband. She claims she is your direct employee and that you orchestrated this smuggling operation. I watched Bradley closely. The sheer sociopathic ease with which he shifted gears was terrifying and fascinating. In the span of a single heartbeat, the panicking cornered rat vanished, replaced entirely by the polished, authoritative regional sales director. He stood up straighter, projecting an aura of shocked, righteous indignation. Detective, what you are telling me is absolutely horrifying, Bradley said, infusing his voice with the perfect amount of professional dismay. I am blindsided by this. Sienna is indeed an administrative assistant at my pharmaceutical corporation, but I can assure you I have absolutely no knowledge of any illegal contraband. The detective remained entirely unmoved. She is insisting the biometric case belongs to you, Mr. Bradley. She claims you manipulated her into carrying it through customs. Bradley let out a heavy, disappointed sigh, shaking his head, as if mourning a tragic reality. Detective Al Mansouri, I must speak candidly about this employee. Sienna has been a severe human resources problem for our corporation over the past 6 months. We were actually planning to terminate her employment upon our return to the United States. She has a highly documented history of severe mental instability and substance abuse issues. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but internally I was taking meticulous notes. He was burying her alive. The woman he had been taking on luxury dates, showering with expensive gifts, and kissing in the airport terminal just hours ago was now being utterly destroyed to save his own skin. Substance abuse. The detective prompted the scratching of a pen audible over the phone line. Yes, Bradley continued, leaning closer to the phone to sound more earnest. We recently caught her stealing prescription medication from our corporate research facility. We tried to get her into a rehabilitation program, but she vehemently refused. She has been acting incredibly erratic, lashing out at senior management, and making delusional claims. I suspect she stole that encrypted hard drive from our secure servers in a desperate bid to sell corporate secrets and fund her drug habit. The lies flowed from his mouth like a toxic river. He was not just denying his involvement, he was actively constructing a criminal profile for Sienna, framing her as a desperate rogue addict who had gone completely off the rails. She states that you and she are intimately involved, the detective pressed. She claims this trip was a coordinated effort. Bradley let out a short, incredulous laugh. Intimately involved, detective, I am sitting here in my hotel suite with my wife, Lauren. We are here celebrating our anniversary. Sienna has developed an extremely disturbing, unrequited obsession with me. I have had to report her to our Human Resources Department multiple times for making inappropriate advances. When I firmly rejected her again on the flight over here, she became deeply unhinged. She must have planted this ridiculous story to frame me as revenge for rejecting her. He was a monster, a pristine, tailored monster. He was leveraging his high-ranking corporate status, his crisp suit, and his presence in a luxury suite with his lawful wife to completely invalidate the desperate, terrified screams of a 26-year-old assistant currently sitting in an interrogation cell. He knew that the Dubai police would look at the profile he was building, a wealthy, established executive traveling with his spouse, versus a young junior employee caught red-handed with a bag full of narcotics, and he was betting his entire life that they would side with him. Mr. Bradley Detective Al-Mansouri said, his voice maintaining its rigid, unyielding professionalism, "These are very serious claims. We will require you to come down to the precinct immediately to provide a formal sworn statement and surrender your passport pending the conclusion of our initial investigation." "Of course," Detective Bradley replied smoothly without missing a beat. "I am fully prepared to cooperate with your investigation in any way possible. I will head down to the station right now. My corporation takes theft of intellectual property and narcotics very seriously. I want to see this rogue employee prosecuted to the fullest extent of your laws. We will expect you within the hour," the detective stated before abruptly disconnecting the call. The line went dead, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the extravagant penthouse suite. Bradley let out a massive, shuddering breath, raking his hands through his hair. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide and pleading, instantly switching his performance from the authoritative executive back to the desperate, cornered husband. He needed me now. He had just painted a picture of a stable, happy marriage to the police, and he needed me to validate that exact illusion. He took a step toward me, reaching out his hands as if to grab my shoulders. But I took a sharp step backward, putting the marble coffee table securely between us. "Lauren, you heard him!" Bradley pleaded, his voice dripping with fabricated desperation. "She is trying to destroy our lives. She is trying to drag me down with her because I fired her. I need you to stand by me. I need you to tell the police that we are happily married and that she is a stalker. You have to back me up." I looked at the man who had tried to turn me into a drug mule. I nodded slowly, offering him a perfectly calibrated look of terrified devotion while I planned his absolute spectacular ruin. A lunged around the heavy marble coffee table and grabbed both of my arms, his fingers digging into my biceps with bruising force. The desperate, pleading husband vanished, replaced by a cornered, vicious animal. He backed me up against the gold leaf wallpaper of the hotel suite, trapping me in his physical shadow. His breath was hot and ragged against my face. "Listen to me very carefully, Lauren," he growled, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. "This is not a request. My entire life, my career, and our financial existence are hanging by a thread because that insane woman got caught. You are going to walk into that police station with me, and you are going to perform the role of your life. You will tell those detectives that Sienna has been harassing us for months. You will swear on record that she is a delusional drug addict who has been stalking me and that I rejected her advances on the flight over here." I kept my expression perfectly molded into a mask of terrified obedience, widening my eyes and letting my lower lip tremble. "Bradley," I whispered, making my voice sound fragile. "But that is a lie. What if they catch us lying? This is Dubai. They do not play games with false statements." He shook me hard enough that my head bumped lightly against the wall. "They will not catch us if you do exactly what I say," he snapped. "You are a compliance auditor. You know how to lie to corporate boards, so you know how to lie to the police. You are going to look that detective right in the eye and corroborate my exact story. If you show even 1 ounce of hesitation, they will lock me up in a desert prison for the rest of my natural life. And if I go down, Lauren, I am taking you with me. I will tell them you packed my bags. I will tell them you had access to the luggage. Do you understand me?" The threat was absolute and beautifully incriminating. He was explicitly outlining a conspiracy to commit perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. But I needed it on the record. I needed his own voice building the bars of his future cell. I forced a choked sob from my throat and let my hands drop to my sides, my right hand brushing against the open pocket of my leather purse, resting on the nearby console table. My fingers slipped inside, feeling for the familiar smooth glass of my smartphone. Without breaking eye contact with his furious face, I blindly double-tapped the side button to activate the quick record voice memo feature I had configured years ago for discreet corporate meetings. A tiny vibration confirmed the microphone was live. "You are hurting me, Bradley," I whimpered, deliberately documenting his physical aggression for the recording. You want me to lie to foreign authorities? You want me to tell them Sienna is a stalker when you have been sleeping with her for months? He scoffed, releasing my arms with a violent shove that sent me stumbling back a half step. I rubbed my arms, ensuring the microphone caught the sound of his rough movement. "Grow up, Lauren," he shouted, pacing the small space between the sofa and the wall. Yes, I was sleeping with her. So what? She was a convenient distraction, a naive little idiot who thought she was going to become the wife of a pharmaceutical executive. She meant absolutely nothing to me. But she got sloppy. She got caught with that black case, and now she is trying to drag me down to save herself. I am not letting some 26-year-old assistant destroy my empire. She took the risk carrying that bag, and now she takes the fall. That is how the world works. I kept my voice low, coaxing him to dig his grave deeper. But the police said the case had drugs in it, Bradley, and an encrypted hard drive. You told me you put your corporate documents in my suitcase. Were you trying to use me to smuggle narcotics? He stopped pacing and glared at me, his eyes burning with arrogant fury. He did not explicitly admit to the contents, but his sheer sociopathic narcissism would not let him back down. I did what I had to do to secure our financial future, he snarled. The pharmaceutical board passed me over for the promotion I deserved. I built that company, Lauren. They owed me millions. That data was my leverage, my golden ticket to a massive payout here in the Emirates. The pills were just a sweetener for the buyers. I hid it in your luggage because your record is spotless. You are invisible to customs. It was a flawless plan until you managed to lose the case, and that stupid girl ended up with it. He took another menacing step forward, pointing his finger at my face. So yes, you are going to lie. You will march into that precinct, hold my hand, and cry on command. You will confirm that Sienna is an obsessed, drug-addicted stalker who stole corporate property to fund her habit. You will do this because everything you have, this luxury trip, your comfortable house, your entire lifestyle is funded by me. You are nothing without me, Lauren. If I go to prison, you go bankrupt. I lowered my head, staring at the floor to hide the triumphant, ice-cold satisfaction blazing in my eyes. The audio file currently saving to my encrypted cloud storage was a masterpiece. It contained his explicit admission of infidelity, his clear intent to commit perjury, his verbal and physical threats against me, and his terrifying confession to international drug smuggling and corporate espionage. He had just handed me the murder weapon, the smoking gun, and the signed confession, all neatly wrapped in one digital file. I let out a shaky breath and slowly looked back up at him. I molded my features into a portrait of a broken, submissive spouse who had finally accepted her grim reality. I wrapped my arms around myself, making myself look small and entirely defeated. "Okay," I whispered, keeping my tone perfectly compliant. "Okay, Bradley. I will do it. I will tell the police whatever you need me to say. I will tell them she is a stalker. I will say she acted crazy on the flight. Just please do not let them arrest me. I will save your career." Bradley's rigid posture instantly relaxed. The furious, cornered animal vanished, and the arrogant, untouchable executive returned. He let out a massive sigh of relief, reaching out to smooth my hair with a sickeningly gentle touch. He truly believed he had completely broken my spirit. "That is my good girl," he murmured, his voice returning to its smooth, manipulative cadence. "I knew you would understand. We are a team, Lauren. We protect each other. Now fix your makeup. We have a performance to give, and we cannot keep Detective Al-Mansouri waiting." I nodded meekly, turning toward the extravagant master bathroom. As I walked away from him, my hand slipped back into my purse. I blindly pressed the button to stop and save the recording. The file instantly synced to my secure cloud server. Bradley thought he was walking into the police station with a loyal, terrified pawn. He had absolutely no idea he was walking side by side with his executioner. The performance at the Dubai police precinct was a masterclass in deception. I sat tightly beside Bradley in the sterile interrogation room, perfectly executing the role of the shell-shocked, naive American wife. When Detective Al-Mansouri pressed for details, I let my voice tremble, corroborating every single lie Bradley had carefully constructed. I confirmed Sienna's erratic behavior, I testified to her fictional substance abuse. I swore under oath that she was dangerously obsessed with my husband. The detectives bought it entirely. They saw a high-powered pharmaceutical executive and his devoted conservative spouse, making Sienna look exactly like the unhinged criminal assistant Bradley painted her to be. We walked out of the precinct 2 hours later, leaving Sienna locked inside a concrete cell facing a judicial system that shows zero mercy for drug trafficking. The 14-hour flight back to Chicago was a study in sociopathic detachment. Bradley drank 2 glasses of vintage champagne, put on his noise-canceling headphones, and slept deeply for 10 straight hours. He looked completely serene, entirely unburdened by the fact that he had just condemned a 26-year-old woman to a horrific fate in a foreign prison to save his own skin. I sat awake the entire flight. I drank black coffee, stared at the digital flight tracker on the seatback screen, and meticulously mapped out my upcoming investigation. Bradley believed the crisis was completely averted. He thought he had successfully manipulated the authorities, discarded his mistress, and secured my silent loyalty. He had absolutely no idea that his escape from Dubai was simply walking out of one trap and stepping directly into a much deadlier snare on American soil. We landed at O'Hare International Airport, passing the exact duty-free boutique where I had initiated his downfall. Bradley whistled a cheerful tune as we collected our luggage. It required every ounce of my professional discipline not to shove him onto the moving conveyor belt. We took a private car service back to our Chicago townhouse. The moment we walked through the front door, Bradley tossed his keys onto the console table, checked his designer watch, and announced he had to jump on a regional sales conference call. He compartmentalized the massive trauma, effortlessly sliding right back into his untouchable corporate persona. He kissed my cheek, thanked me for being a team player, and told me to get some rest. I did not rest. The second Bradley drove his luxury sedan out of our driveway the following morning, I picked up my phone and called my accounting firm. I requested a week of immediate personal leave citing severe jet lag and a sudden family emergency. My managing partner approved it without a single question. I brewed a strong pot of dark roast coffee, pulled my hair into a tight practical bun, and walked deliberately into our home office. I booted up my high-powered dual-monitor workstation. I closed my eyes for one brief second, shedding the identity of a betrayed wife. When I opened them, I was strictly a senior compliance auditor, and I was about to conduct the most ruthless, unforgiving audit of my entire career. I was treating my marriage as a highly compromised, fraudulent corporation. If Bradley was brazen enough to use me as a human drug mule, he was undoubtedly hiding other massive liabilities. Criminals with his level of arrogant narcissism never commit just one isolated type of fraud. They are chronic rule breakers who fundamentally believe the boundaries governing normal society simply do not apply to them. I needed to uncover his entire hidden financial landscape. I opened a blank encrypted spreadsheet and titled it Operation Liability. I began with the low-hanging fruit, downloading 2 full years of transaction histories from our joint checking and savings accounts. I systematically cross-referenced every single line item against our shared credit card statements. On the surface, the numbers painted a picture of boring upper-middle-class stability. There were regular mortgage payments, utility bills, my own modest grocery spending, and Bradley's standard corporate expense reimbursements. But a seasoned auditor knows that a pristine surface is usually just a carefully constructed distraction. I needed to find the money that was deliberately missing from the ledger. I accessed our digital tax vault and pulled our filed returns for the previous 3 fiscal years. I placed the tax documents on my left monitor and aligned them against the direct payroll deposits hitting our joint checking account on my right monitor. It took me less than 20 minutes to spot the massive discrepancy. Bradley's base salary matched his W-2 forms perfectly. However, his substantial quarterly performance bonuses were completely absent from our shared banking ecosystem. For the past 2 years, whenever I asked why we could not use his lucrative bonuses to accelerate the payments on his lingering debts, Bradley had smoothly claimed the pharmaceutical board was freezing all executive payouts to fund new research and development. It was a highly plausible corporate excuse, and I had trusted him enough not to verify it. That was my first mistake, and it would be my last. I needed to see the exact destination of those missing funds. I logged into the National Credit Bureau portals, leveraging my advanced professional credentials to pull a comprehensive deep-level credit report on Bradley. I bypassed the standard consumer summaries and requested the raw, unfiltered data strings that show every single inquiry open line of credit and hidden financial obligation tied to his Social Security number. The progress bar on my screen loaded slowly, verifying his identity credentials against the federal database. The cooling fan on my computer hummed loudly in the quiet office. When the heavily encrypted PDF finally rendered on my screen, the illusion of our secure financial foundation completely disintegrated. I scrolled down the page, my eyes scanning the dense rows of financial data, preparing myself to follow the money straight into the darkest corners of my husband's secret life. He is trying to burn your house down, Lauren, so we are going to lock the doors and let him burn inside it. Jamal carefully unplugged his encrypted drive and packed his secondary monitor. We quickly agreed to use a secure messaging app that bypassed Bradley's keylogger entirely. Jamal gave me a firm nod and quietly exited through the back patio door. The moment the back door clicked shut, the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed sharply. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Standing on my porch, aggressively clutching a quilted Chanel handbag like a physical weapon, was Sylvia, my mother-in-law. Her posture was rigid, her jaw clenched tight. I took a steadying breath, mentally transitioning from a forensic investigator back into the role of a distressed, overwhelmed wife. I walked downstairs, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy oak door open. Sylvia pushed past me without a single word of greeting, her expensive floral perfume instantly suffocating the small entryway. She marched straight into the formal living room and dropped her handbag onto the velvet sofa. She turned to face me, her features twisted into a mask of calculated, furious panic. "I have a massive crisis on our hands, Lauren," Sylvia announced, pacing the hardwood floor with the exact same arrogant, entitled stride her son used when he was trapped in his own lies. "Bradley called me from his corporate office an hour ago. He told me absolutely everything that happened at the airport." I remained standing near the archway, keeping my physical distance. Everything I asked, testing the waters to see exactly which fabricated version of reality Bradley had fed his mother to save face. "He told you about the contraband, the sudden arrest." Sylvia waved her manicured hand dismissively, as if international drug smuggling was merely a minor social faux pas to be quickly brushed aside. "He told me about that foolish, highly unstable girl he hired." She snapped, her tone dripping with venom. "Sienna, the assistant." She stopped pacing, narrowing her eyes with sharp maternal judgment. "He also told me that she is desperately trying to implicate him in her disgusting legal mess to reduce her own sentence. And quite frankly, Lauren, I am looking at you right now, and I am entirely unsurprised that my son had to look elsewhere for comfort in the first place." The absolute audacity of her statement hit me like a physical shockwave. I did not flinch. My compliance training had taught me to observe and document, never to react blindly to emotional provocation. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone deadly quiet. Sylvia crossed her arms, leaning entirely into her delusion. "Do not dare play the victim with me today. You have always been completely absorbed in your tedious accounting career. You come home exhausted, you talk about tax codes and corporate spreadsheets, and you offer him absolutely zero warmth. Bradley is a high-level executive operating under immense daily pressure. Men like him have intense emotional and physical needs. They require a soft, nurturing environment to decompress." I stared at the woman who had raised a narcissistic criminal, watching her twist reality to absolve him of all accountability. "So my demanding work schedule forced him to traffic narcotics and commit adultery?" I asked, stripping away her polite euphemisms to expose the ugly, undeniable truth. Sylvia scoffed, taking a menacing step closer. "Do not use such dramatic, ugly language." He had a brief indiscretion with an eager young subordinate who practically threw herself at him. It means absolutely nothing to his actual life. It is a biological imperative for men under severe stress to seek an outlet when their wives consistently fail to provide one. If you had spent less time balancing checkbooks and more time being an attentive, loving spouse, he never would have noticed that cheap little assistant. You drove him to this distraction, Lauren. You share the blame. The psychological projection was masterful. She was actively weaponizing my dedication to our financial stability to justify his horrific betrayals. Before I could point out the absolute insanity of her logic, Sylvia shifted focus to the true purpose of her sudden visit. But we can assign blame later, she stated, her tone turning brisk and authoritative. Right now, we have to protect Bradley's career and the family reputation. That girl is sitting in a foreign holding cell, terrified and desperate. Desperate people talk to the police. If she continues spreading lies to the Dubai authorities about Bradley's involvement, his pharmaceutical board will suspend him pending a federal investigation. We cannot let her ruin his entire life over her own stupid mistakes. I crossed my arms, watching her spin her criminal web. And how exactly do you plan to stop her from talking to the police? I asked. Sylvia looked me dead in the eye, completely devoid of shame or moral hesitation. We need to hire an elite international defense attorney based in the United Arab Emirates. Someone who can get to Sienna, immediately represent her legally, and ensure she signs a binding non-disclosure agreement before she says another word to the detectives. We buy her silence by funding her absolute best defense. It was a brilliant, highly illegal strategy. She wanted to bribe a key witness under the guise of providing legal counsel. And who is paying for this elite international defense attorney? I inquired, keeping my expression entirely blank. Sylvia did not hesitate for a single second. You are, she demanded. Bradley's capital is currently tied up in corporate investments, and my assets are not entirely liquid right now. But you have a massive, fully vested retirement account from your decade at the accounting firm. You need to initiate an emergency hardship withdrawal today. We need at least $80,000 wired to the legal team by tomorrow morning to secure their retainer. I stood perfectly still, letting the magnitude of her request wash over me. My mother-in-law was standing in the house I paid for, blaming me for her son's infidelity and demanding I drain my entire life savings to bail out his mistress, just to keep him out of federal prison. Let me make sure I understand you correctly, Sylvia, I said, my voice dropping to a low glacial whisper. You want me to liquidate the retirement fund I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. You want me to take a massive tax penalty and hand over my financial future to hire a defense lawyer for the 26-year-old woman your son has been sleeping with for 8 months. Sylvia frowned, intensely irritated by my lack of immediate compliance. It is not about her, Lauren. It is about protecting your husband. It is about protecting your marriage. If Bradley loses his job, you lose your luxurious lifestyle. You have to look at the bigger picture here. This is what families do in a crisis. We make sacrifices for the greater good. I looked at this woman, seeing the exact blueprint of Bradley's arrogant entitlement. I took a deliberate step forward, invading her personal space. Absolutely not, I said, delivering the words with the finality of a judge handing down a sentence. Sylvia blinked, genuinely shocked. What do you mean, no? I mean no. I repeated, my tone devoid of any emotion. I will not drain a single penny of my retirement accounts to clean up Bradley's catastrophic mess. I will not fund a legal defense for his mistress. I will not participate in witness tampering or international bribery. And I will certainly not apologize for working hard to build my own financial independence while your son was out playing a dangerous, illegal game. Sylvia's face flushed a deep, angry red. You selfish, vindictive little girl! She hissed, her hands balling into fists. You are willing to let your husband's entire empire collapse just to satisfy your own petty jealousy. You are going to let him go to jail. I smiled, a tight, terrifyingly calm expression. If Bradley's empire collapses, Sylvia, it is because he built it on a foundation of gasoline and handed a match to his assistant. I am not the one who packed that bag. I am not the one who walked it into an airport. He made his choices. Now he gets to face the consequences. I walked over to the heavy oak front door and pulled it wide open, gesturing to the porch outside. Your son's crisis is not my financial burden. This conversation is over. Please leave my house. Sylvia grabbed her designer handbag from the sofa, glaring at me with absolute venom. You will regret this, Lauren. When he clears his name, he will leave you with absolutely nothing. We will see about that, I replied smoothly. I watched her storm down the driveway, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete. I shut the door firmly behind her and locked the deadbolt. She thought she was protecting her son's future. She had absolutely no idea that his future had already been cancelled. I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the heavy oak door, taking exactly 1 second to exhale the toxic energy Sylvia had brought into my home. The deadbolt had barely clicked into place when my phone buzzed in my pocket with a new perimeter security notification. I pulled up the camera feed, expecting my mother-in-law to have returned for a second round of screaming. Instead, standing on my front porch holding 2 large cups of dark roast coffee and a brown paper bag smelling faintly of spicy Thai peanut noodles, was Jamal. Jamal is 38 years old, a brilliant African-American cybersecurity architect and the husband of Bradley's younger sister, Vanessa. While the rest of his family treated Bradley like a flawless golden child, Jamal had always possessed the distinct ability to see right through my husband's arrogant facade. He was incredibly perceptive, fiercely protective of the people he cared about, and someone I trusted completely. I quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open. Jamal took one look at my face and stepped inside, setting the food and coffee on the entryway table. He did not offer any meaningless small talk. Bradley has been calling Vanessa all morning, acting completely manic, Jamal said, keeping his tone calm and strictly analytical. He was asking bizarre, highly specific, hypothetical questions about international extradition treaties and frozen banking assets. Plus, the rumor mill at his corporate headquarters is spinning entirely out of control today. Word is leaking that his executive assistant got detained by customs in Dubai. I know you just got back from that exact trip, Lauren. Tell me what is happening. I locked the front door again and gestured for him to follow me upstairs. As we walked up the hardwood steps, the massive weight of the situation finally settled over me. I was preparing to wage absolute war against the man I had married, dismantling a life I had spent 6 years building. But as I looked at the grim, unwavering determination on Jamal's face, I knew there was absolutely no turning back. When Jamal walked into my home office and saw the dual monitors glowing with highlighted bank statements, forged loan documents, and offshore wire transfers, he let out a low, sharp whistle. "You have been busy," he murmured, leaning over my desk to examine the meticulously color-coded spreadsheets. I laid out the situation in rapid clinical detail. I told him about the biometric case hidden in my luggage, the lethal fentanyl, the stolen corporate hard drive, the arrest in Dubai, and the massive mortgage fraud Bradley committed to fund his gambling debts and his mistress. Jamal stood perfectly still, his jaw tightening with growing anger. He had never imagined Bradley was capable of this level of criminal depravity. "He used your completely clean background to mule narcotics," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave in cold, concentrated fury. "And he forged your signature to steal the equity from your home. This is federal prison, Lauren. We need to make sure your digital footprint is locked down right now. If Bradley is pulling amateur-hour corporate espionage, he might have left digital traps." Jamal pulled a specialized, heavily encrypted USB drive from his jacket pocket. He walked over to the internet router in the corner of my office, plugged his device into the diagnostic port, and connected it directly to his laptop. His fingers flew rapidly across the keyboard, bringing up lines of dense code that meant nothing to me. Within 3 minutes, his eyes narrowed sharply. "Do not log into any bank accounts or send sensitive emails from this network," Jamal instructed, pointing a warning finger at my computer screen. He installed a secondary router-level keylogger right before you left for Dubai. It is a highly aggressive malware script designed to capture every single keystroke search query and password you type. He is actively spying on your home network from his office. A wave of profound disgust washed over me. Bradley was monitoring my digital activity, waiting to see if I discovered the stolen funds or searched for divorce attorneys. He was treating me like a hostile corporate entity. The sheer volume of his betrayal was staggering. He had weaponized my career, my home, and now my digital privacy. "Can you remove it?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. Jamal smirked, a brilliant, highly calculating expression crossing his face. "Removing it tips him off. Instead, I am going to isolate the payload and feed it a continuous loop of synthesized internet traffic. To him, it will look like you are spending your day browsing online recipes and reading harmless fashion blogs. Meanwhile, we will use his open backdoor connection to launch a counteroffensive." Jamal sat down at my desk, bypassing my operating system to run his own advanced cybersecurity software. He pulled out a secondary screen from his backpack, tethering it to the main terminal. He split the data feed, allowing us to simultaneously track the inbound and outbound traffic, hitting the malicious keylogger script. If Bradley left an active connection open between his office network and my home router, Jamal could reverse engineer the signal and walk straight into Bradley's hidden digital vault. We sat in tense silence for 20 minutes, the only sound the rapid clicking of the keyboard. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen, every percentage point dragging us deeper into the abyss of my husband's criminal mind. Jamal navigated expertly through proxy servers and bypassed Bradley's pathetically weak security questions. "Got him," Jamal announced softly, hitting the enter key with a satisfying decisive strike. The screen refreshed, displaying a highly encrypted communication channel Bradley had been using on the dark web. It was the absolute smoking gun. We scrolled through a series of secure messages between Bradley and a foreign corporate syndicate based in the Middle East. Bradley had successfully negotiated the sale of the stolen pharmaceutical formulas contained on that hard drive. The agreed purchase price was an astronomical $2 million. Jamal clicked on the final message in the thread. It contained highly specific payment instructions pointing to a numbered offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. The account was registered to a shell company Bradley had secretly incorporated 6 months ago. He was planning to collect the $2 million, let the bank foreclose on your house to cover his forged loan, and vanish entirely, Jamal stated, his eyes fixed on the damning offshore account details. He was going to leave you utterly bankrupt and potentially facing federal charges while he retired to a non-extradition country. I stared at the screen, absorbing the absolute depth of his malevolence. He had meticulously engineered my total financial and legal destruction. "I need you to mirror every single piece of this data, Jamal," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as cracked glass. "I want the offshore account numbers, the corporate espionage messages, and the keylogger logs. We are going to build a prosecution file so heavily armed that it will completely obliterate his existence." Jamal nodded, his hands already moving to secure the digital evidence. "He is trying to burn your house down, Lauren. So we are going to lock the doors and let him burn inside it." The downloading progress bar crawled across the screen, securing the offshore account details and the encrypted chat logs. Just as the transfer hit 90%, a harsh, abrasive chime erupted from the laptop speakers. Jamal's fingers froze over the keyboard. We both stared at the dark web communication interface, still mirrored on the split screen. A new, highly encrypted message had just broken through Bradley's secure portal. The sender ID was masked, displaying only an alphanumeric string originating from a routed server in the United Arab Emirates. The text rendered in stark white font against the pitch-black background. "Delivery failed. Carrier detained by authorities. Our property has been confiscated. You have 24 hours to produce the pharmaceutical data and the secondary cargo. If the assets are not delivered, we expect an immediate refund of the initial deposit. Failure to comply will result in severe permanent consequences for you and your family. We know where you live." The threat was absolute and terrifyingly clear. Bradley had taken an upfront deposit from the Dubai syndicate, likely to fund his lavish lifestyle and his massive gambling debts before the final exchange even occurred. Now the wealthy buyers had lost their lethal narcotics and their stolen corporate intellectual property. They did not care that Sienna was rotting in a foreign holding cell. They only cared about their investment, and they were giving Bradley an impossibly tight window to either produce the stolen goods or refund money he had already spent entirely. I felt a cold chill radiate down my spine, but the panic was instantly replaced by a fierce protective anger. Bradley had painted a massive target on my back. He had explicitly endangered his own household to satisfy his reckless greed. "They are threatening his life," Jamal stated quietly, his eyes scanning the aggressive message. "And by extension, he has put you in the crosshairs of an international criminal syndicate. He is cornered, Lauren. A cornered narcissist is the most dangerous kind. He is going to panic and he is going to look for a scapegoat." Almost as if on cue, the secondary monitor displaying Bradley's active keystrokes burst into a sudden frenzy of digital activity. Jamal leaned forward, his eyes tracking the rapid sequence of commands Bradley was executing from his corporate office downtown. "He is logging into the Cayman Islands Shell Company," Jamal narrated, his voice tight with deep concentration as he followed the digital breadcrumbs. "He is accessing the illicit corporate funds, but he is not wiring them back to Dubai. He does not have enough liquidity to cover the refund. So what exactly is he doing?" I watched the destination routing numbers populate on the screen. The digits looked hauntingly familiar. I pulled up my own personal financial spreadsheet, quickly cross-referencing the secure bank code Bradley was typing. My stomach dropped completely. "He is not refunding the buyers," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He is initiating a domestic wire transfer. He is funneling the stolen corporate money directly into an old dormant checking account, registered entirely under my maiden name." Jamal turned to look at me, absolute shock registering on his face. "He is framing you. He is building a paper trail," I confirmed, my analytical mind instantly dissecting his vicious strategy. "He knows the federal authorities are going to audit his entire life the exact moment his pharmaceutical board discovers the missing intellectual property. He knows the Dubai police are actively interrogating his mistress. He needs a mastermind to take the fall for the embezzlement and the smuggling operation. By dumping the dirty corporate money directly into my personal accounts, he is manufacturing financial evidence that makes me look like the criminal architect." It was a breathtakingly evil calculation. If the FBI investigated, they would find my signature forged on the massive home equity loan, establishing a clear motive of sudden financial desperation. They would find the illicit funds resting securely in my dormant banking accounts, establishing the profits of corporate treason. Bradley would play the devastated, oblivious husband who had just discovered his cunning auditor wife had used her professional expertise to steal millions traffic drugs and set up his naive assistant to take the fall. "He is initiating multiple structured transfers," Jamal said, his fingers flying across the keyboard to capture every single packet of data. "He is keeping them just under the federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering immediate bank alarms. He thinks he has plenty of time to set the trap before the authorities start asking questions. Let him do it." I ordered, my voice hardening into solid steel. "Do not block the transfers. Do not alert the bank." Jamal paused, looking at me with intense concern. "Lauren, if those funds clear into your account, you become an active participant in international money laundering. The federal government does not care about your excuses if the dirty money is sitting under your social security number." "I am a senior compliance auditor, Jamal," I reminded him, staring coldly at the screen as my husband actively tried to destroy my freedom. "I know exactly how to handle fraudulent deposits. If we block the transfer now, Bradley will realize his network is compromised. He will panic, destroy his hard drives, and potentially flee the country before we can secure a conviction. We need him to feel completely confident that his framing strategy is working flawlessly." I grabbed a fresh notepad from my desk drawer and began drafting an official incident report. "I am going to let the money hit my account. The exact second the funds clear, I am filing a proactive suspicious activity report directly with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I will document the unauthorized transfers, flag the offshore origin account, and officially declare myself a victim of identity theft and financial framing." Jamal's tense expression slowly morphed into a look of profound respect. "You are going to use his own framing attempt as the definitive proof of his guilt." "Exactly," I replied, my eyes never leaving the illuminated screen. "We are going to build a cage out of his own financial transactions." Jamal immediately went to work. He deployed a packet sniffer to capture the raw data flowing from Bradley's office computer to my dormant checking account. Every time Bradley initiated a new wire transfer, An encrypted notification pinged on Jamal's secondary monitor. We watched in stunned silence as the deposits hit my ledger. $5,000, $7,500, $8,200. Bradley was methodically draining his offshore Cayman account and dumping the stolen corporate funds right into my lap. He was working fast, clearly terrified by the death threats he had received from his Dubai buyers. I need the exact origin point of these transfers, I told Jamal, pointing to the incoming routing numbers. He thinks he is hiding behind a proxy server, but I want his actual physical location tied to every single keystroke. Jamal typed furiously, his dark eyes reflecting the harsh light of the monitor. He is using a commercial VPN to mask his IP address, making it look like the transfers are originating from a server in Switzerland. But he is sloppy. He forgot to disable the localized geolocation protocols on his corporate network. I am bouncing the signal back through the keylogger payload we isolated earlier. A map interface loaded on Jamal's screen, zooming in on the downtown Chicago grid. A red beacon pulsed rhythmically, pinpointing a specific commercial skyscraper. There, Jamal said, a grim smile touching his lips. That is the exact longitude and latitude of his pharmaceutical headquarters. I have the physical MAC address of the device he is using. It is his dedicated corporate desktop. He is literally funneling illicit international funds from his corner office on a company-issued machine. I grabbed a fresh USB drive from my locked desk drawer. The picture was now complete. Bradley was not just laundering money, he was utilizing his employer's network to conduct federal crimes. I began exporting the comprehensive transaction logs, meticulously saving every IP address timestamp and routing sequence Jamal had captured. As an auditor, I knew that raw data was easily dismissed in court if the chain of custody was broken. I needed to present a narrative so undeniable that a federal prosecutor could secure an indictment in minutes. I opened my dedicated compliance software and began compiling the master dossier. I started with the initial crime, attaching the forged home equity loan documents and highlighting the falsified signature. Next, I imported the bank statements detailing his massive gambling debts and the exorbitant luxury purchases he made for Sienna. I then linked those expenditures directly to the offshore shell company he had created in the Cayman Islands. Finally, I attached the real-time logs Jamal had just captured, proving that Bradley was currently transferring the proceeds of corporate espionage into my personal accounts to frame me. This was no longer just a divorce case. It was a massive multi-tiered federal racketeering investigation. We worked relentlessly for 3 straight hours. Jamal fortified the digital perimeter of my home network, ensuring Bradley had absolutely no idea his keylogger had been hijacked. I finalized the report, applying the rigorous formatting standards required by federal regulatory agencies. I titled the encrypted file Operation Liability and saved it to a secure, tamper-proof external drive. Now comes the dangerous part, I said, staring at the small silver drive resting in the palm of my hand. I have to deliver this before he finishes shifting the funds. If the bank's automated algorithms flag my account first, I become a suspect instead of a cooperating witness. During my 10 years as a financial compliance auditor, I had collaborated on several high-profile corporate fraud investigations. My firm frequently partnered with federal authorities when unearthing massive corporate embezzlement schemes. I had a direct contact in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, a seasoned special agent named Harrison. I pulled out my phone and dialed Agent Harrison's direct line. He answered on the second ring. Lauren Harrison said, his voice carrying the familiar gruffness of a man who spent his life chasing white-collar criminals. It has been a while. Tell me you are calling with a lucrative tip. I need an emergency meeting, I stated, keeping my tone strictly professional. I have uncovered an active multi-million-dollar corporate espionage and international drug smuggling operation. The primary suspect is currently transferring illicit funds to frame an innocent party, and I have the entire digital chain of custody secured on a drive. There was a sharp silence on the other end of the line. Where and when? Harrison asked. An hour later, I sat in the sterile, windowless conference room of the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. Agent Harrison sat across from me, flanked by a cybercrimes specialist. Jamal had opted to stay behind, continuing to monitor Bradley's digital activity from my home office to ensure the trap remained perfectly intact. I slid the encrypted drive across the metal table. I provided the decryption key and watched as the federal agents loaded the dossier onto their secure terminal. For 45 minutes, I walked them through every single layer of Bradley's criminal enterprise. I explained the biometric case hidden in my luggage, the fentanyl pills, the stolen pharmaceutical hard drive, and the subsequent arrest of his mistress in Dubai. I showed them the forged mortgage documents and the real-time logs proving he was actively laundering the money from his corporate desktop. Agent Harrison stared at the screens, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. He looked up at me, a profound mixture of professional respect and sheer astonishment registering on his face. "Your husband tried to use you as a blind drug mule," Harrison stated, his voice quiet with suppressed anger. "And when the payload was intercepted, he immediately pivoted to framing you for his embezzlement." "He is a cornered animal," I replied, maintaining my icy composure. "He owes $2 million to a dangerous syndicate in the Middle East. He is desperately trying to construct a narrative where I am the mastermind, hoping to hand me over to the authorities so he can escape with whatever funds he manages to hide." The cybercrime specialist leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his notebook. "This audit trail is flawless, Lauren. You have handed us a fully packaged federal indictment on a silver platter. We have his MAC address, his IP routing the offshore account details, and his explicit communications on the dark web. We can secure an arrest warrant by tomorrow morning." "Do not arrest him yet," I countered, looking directly into Agent Harrison's eyes. "If you arrest him at his office, he will immediately invoke his right to counsel and try to spin a story about a corporate hack. He will claim he is the victim of a sophisticated cyber attack. I need him to feel absolutely invincible. I need him to believe his framing attempt worked perfectly." "What are you planning?" Harrison asked, narrowing his eyes. "Bradley invited me to dinner tomorrow night," I explained, laying out the final stage of my counteroffensive. "He is going to perform a massive fake apology for his affair. He wants to manipulate me into signing a divorce settlement that legally binds me to his forged debts. I am going to let him present his terms. I am going to let him put all his cards on the table in front of witnesses. And then I want your agents walking through the door." Harrison gave a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You want to execute the arrest in public. I want to completely shatter his illusion of control," I corrected. "I want the pharmaceutical board directors present. I want his enabling parents in the room. I want him to look me in the eye when the handcuffs go on, knowing that the boring, rigid accountant he tried to destroy is the exact person who engineered his absolute downfall." Harrison closed the file folder on the desk and nodded. "Consider it done. We will monitor the inbound transfers to your account and freeze them the exact second the trap springs." I stood up, shaking hands with the federal agents. As I walked out of the FBI field office and into the bustling Chicago streets, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Bradley. "Reservations confirmed for tomorrow at 8. I cannot wait to see you, Lauren. We have so much to talk about." I stared at his lying words, a cold, triumphant smile touching my lips. I typed back my response without a single trace of hesitation. "I am looking forward to it, Bradley. It will be a night you will never forget." The following evening, the atmosphere inside La Cura was suffocatingly opulent. It was the kind of notoriously expensive French restaurant where the lighting was deliberately dim, the jazz was played live by a string quartet, and the menu did not list any prices. It was Bradley's favorite place in Chicago to entertain high-profile corporate clients. Choosing this specific location for our dinner was a calculated psychological tactic. He wanted to surround me with the undeniable luxury of his corporate lifestyle, silently reminding me of exactly what I would lose if I refused to forgive him. I arrived exactly 5 minutes late. I wore a conservative pale gray silk dress that made me look suitably fragile and exhausted. I kept my makeup minimal, ensuring the dark circles under my eyes were visible, playing the role of a woman who had been weeping over her broken marriage for days. The maitre d' escorted me to a secluded corner booth where Bradley was already waiting. He stood up immediately as I approached, buttoning his tailored navy suit jacket. He pulled out my chair with exaggerated gentlemanly care, offering me a soft, sorrowful smile that made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. "You look beautiful, Lauren," he murmured, taking his seat across from me. He reached across the white linen tablecloth, his large hands gently engulfing mine. "Thank you so much for coming tonight. I know how incredibly difficult this must be for you." I lowered my gaze, staring at the polished silverware. I let my shoulders slump forward, projecting total emotional exhaustion. "I did not want to come," I said, keeping my voice quiet and unsteady. "But I needed to hear what you had to say. I need to understand why you would do this to us." Bradley let out a heavy, shuddering sigh. He signaled the sommelier with a subtle nod, ordering a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir that easily cost $1,000. Once the wine was poured and we were completely alone in our private alcove, Bradley began the performance of a lifetime. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and looked deeply into my eyes. To his credit, he actually managed to produce a single gleaming tear that tracked slowly down his cheek. If I had not spent the last 48 hours downloading his federal crimes onto an encrypted hard drive, I might have actually believed his display of agonizing remorse. "Lauren, I have been a complete arrogant fool," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking with perfectly modulated sorrow. "What happened with Sienna was a massive, catastrophic mistake. It was never a real relationship. It was a brief, stupid emotional affair that spun entirely out of control. I was under so much immense pressure at the pharmaceutical firm. The board was breathing down my neck about the regional sales quotas, and I felt like I was drowning in corporate expectations. Sienna was just an assistant who fed my ego when I was feeling totally inadequate. I used her for validation, and I deeply regret it." I blinked rapidly, forcing a glossy sheen of moisture into my own eyes. "An emotional affair," I repeated, letting a subtle tremor slip into my tone. "Bradley, the police in Dubai arrested her. They said she had illegal narcotics and corporate data. They said she was your employee. Are you telling me she went crazy and tried to smuggle drugs just because you rejected her?" Bradley nodded vigorously, gripping my hands tighter. "Yes," he insisted, his face a portrait of earnest desperation. "I broke things off with her on the flight over. I told her I loved you, that I wanted to fix our marriage, and that she was fired. She completely lost her mind, Lauren. She must have stolen those corporate files to sabotage my career, and the drugs were likely her own sick attempt to fund her revenge. I had absolutely nothing to do with that black case. I swear to you on my life, I am a flawed husband, but I am not a criminal." He was so incredibly convincing. He wove his fabricated narrative with such seamless confidence that it was genuinely terrifying to witness. He was looking his wife dead in the eye, weeping over a fake emotional crisis, while actively initiating bank transfers to frame her for international money laundering. I took a slow, trembling breath and gently pulled one of my hands free to wipe a fake tear from my cheek. "I was so scared when the police called you," I whispered, playing directly into his massive ego. "I thought I was going to lose you. I thought our entire life was over. When we got back to Chicago, I could barely get out of bed. I have just been sitting in the house staring at the walls, completely paralyzed." The relief that washed over Bradley's face was instantaneous and profound. My fabricated confession of total paralysis was exactly what he needed to hear. It confirmed his belief that his keylogger software was feeding him accurate information, that I was just sitting at home browsing the internet and crying, completely oblivious to his offshore wire transfers and his forged home equity loan. He thought he had successfully neutralized his biggest potential threat. He believed the docile, predictable accountant he married was safely back in her box. "You are never going to lose me," Lauren, Bradley promised, his voice returning to its smooth, authoritative cadence. "I am going to fix this. I am going to handle the corporate fallout from Sienna's insane actions, and I am going to dedicate the rest of my life to making it up to you. We are going to rebuild our trust. We can start over. I just need you to stand by my side while I navigate this temporary crisis. Can you do that for me? Can you give me a second chance to be the husband you deserve? I looked at him, my expression perfectly mirroring the desperate hope of a woman clinging to a broken marriage. I reached across the table and placed my hand firmly over his. I will do whatever it takes to protect our family, Bradley. I said, my voice carrying a solemn, unwavering vow. I promise you, I am going to make sure you get exactly what you deserve. Bradley smiled, a genuine, arrogant smirk of absolute victory settling onto his handsome features. He picked up his crystal wine glass and held it up for a toast, completely unaware that he was celebrating his own funeral. He thought he had just secured his perfect scapegoat. He had no idea that I had already handed his entire digital soul over to the federal government. The illusion of his control was absolute, and the stage was now flawlessly set for the final act. The drive back to our Chicago townhouse was wrapped in a suffocating layer of artificial comfort. Bradley played soft jazz on the car stereo, occasionally reaching over to pat my hand, maintaining his grand performance of the deeply remorseful husband working to mend his fractured marriage. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past, mentally preparing for whatever trap he was about to spring. A man like Bradley does not buy a $1,000 bottle of wine just to apologize. He views every interaction as a transaction and investment that demands an immediate return. I knew the bill was coming due the moment we stepped through our front door. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut and the deadbolt slid into place, the loving, attentive husband vanished completely. The warm, apologetic posture he had worn at the restaurant evaporated. His shoulders stiffened, his gaze hardened, and he walked straight to his leather briefcase resting on the entryway console table. He snapped the brass latches open and withdrew a thick manila envelope, carrying it into the formal living room. He sat down on the velvet sofa, dropping the envelope onto the marble coffee table with a heavy, authoritative thud. He gestured for me to sit in the armchair across from him. "Lauren, sit down," Bradley instructed, his voice entirely stripped of the gentle affection he had utilized all evening. "We need to talk about the reality of our situation. The emotional part is out of the way, but now we have to handle the logistics." I took my seat, keeping my posture small and compliant. I folded my hands in my lap, projecting the image of an exhausted, emotionally drained wife. "Logistics, Bradley. I thought we were going to work on rebuilding our trust." "We are," he replied smoothly, unfastening his suit jacket and leaning forward. "But we have to be pragmatic. Sienna is currently talking to the Dubai authorities. My corporate board of directors has caught wind of the situation, and they are launching a massive internal compliance review. If the federal authorities decide to freeze my assets pending an investigation into her smuggling charges, they will freeze our joint accounts too. They could seize everything we have built together, Lauren. Our cash, our investments, even this house." He paused, letting the fabricated threat hang in the silent air. It was a spectacular pivot. He was using the very crimes he committed to manufacture a financial panic, painting the government as the villain who was coming to steal our livelihood. "I cannot let them ruin your financial future because of my mistake," Bradley continued, his voice adopting a tone of noble sacrifice. "I spoke with a private asset protection attorney this morning. He advised me that the only completely bulletproof way to shield your assets from a corporate federal seizure is a strategic paper divorce. We sever our legal ties immediately. We transfer the clean assets to you, and we separate our liabilities. We remain together emotionally, but legally, you are untouchable. Once the corporate investigation clears my name, we can easily remarry." It was a brilliantly sinister maneuver. He was framing a divorce settlement as a desperate act of love and protection. He pushed the manila envelope across the marble table toward me. I reached out and pulled the thick stack of legal documents from the sleeve. The header read, "Marital Settlement and Asset Separation Agreement." It was printed on the official letterhead of a high-end downtown law firm. He had likely been drafting this document for weeks, refining the clauses while simultaneously funneling stolen corporate funds into my dormant banking accounts to frame me. "I had the lawyers draft it to be completely fair and amicable," Bradley stated, leaning back against the sofa cushions with an air of immense satisfaction. "You keep the house. You keep your retirement accounts. We split the liquid cash savings right down the middle. It is a completely clean break to protect you from the fallout of Sienna's insane vendetta. I slowly flipped through the dense pages of legal jargon, maintaining my expression of overwhelmed sadness. As a financial compliance auditor, I spend my life dissecting complex contracts. I can read a 50-page corporate liability waiver in minutes and spot a single irregular clause buried in a sea of boilerplate text. I scanned past the standard property division clauses and the asset allocation tables, moving directly to the section titled Assumption of Shared and Individual Debt Liabilities. And there it was. Buried on page 17, nestled quietly beneath a paragraph regarding joint credit card debt and future tax obligations, was the poison pill. The clause explicitly stated that Lauren assumes 100% of the liability for the secondary secured trade line attached to the primary residence, including any and all outstanding balances, principal, and accrued interest, up to the maximum limit of $150,000. He was trying to legally bind me to the fraudulent home equity loan he had taken out by forging my signature. If I signed this document, I would officially acknowledge the debt as my own financial responsibility. I would instantly legitimize his forgery. He would walk away with his clean half of our cash, and I would be left holding a massive six-figure liability that I never authorized, fully tethered to a house that the bank would inevitably foreclose on. It was the final devastating piece of his framing operation. He wanted to bankrupt me, frame me for his corporate embezzlement, and legally absolve himself of his illicit gambling debts with one single signature. A white-hot wave of fury crashed through my chest, but I ruthlessly suppressed it. I let out a soft, shaky breath, letting my hands tremble just enough to make the legal papers rustle audibly. I looked up at Bradley, forcing my eyes to fill with tears. "This is so much to process, Bradley," I whispered, letting a tear spill over my eyelashes. "A divorce. Even a paper one. It feels so final. It breaks my heart that we have to do this just to protect ourselves from that horrible woman." Bradley's chest puffed out slightly. He reached across the table, offering a sympathetic, patronizing smile. "It breaks my heart too, Lauren. But it is the only way to keep you safe. The lawyers need it signed and notarized immediately before the corporate audit expands. Just sign the back page and I will handle all the filing." I clutched the documents to my chest, shaking my head with a perfect display of naive bureaucratic caution. "You know I cannot just sign a legal contract without understanding the tax implications, Bradley. My accounting firm has strict regulations about asset transfers. I just need to have a standard review with a colleague to ensure the tax burdens are properly balanced. I will have it reviewed first thing tomorrow morning, and we can sign it together at the law office." Bradley frowned, a flash of genuine irritation breaking through his calm facade. He wanted this finalized tonight. He needed the trap closed. Lauren, time is incredibly critical here. A standard review is just going to slow down our protection strategy. "I promise it will not take long," I insisted, injecting a tone of desperate devotion into my voice. "I just want to make sure the IRS does not penalize us when we merge our assets back together after this blows over. We can meet at the lawyer's office tomorrow at 3. I will have it fully executed then. Please, Bradley, just let me do this by the book so I do not jeopardize my own license." Bradley stared at me for a long, tense moment, assessing my absolute compliance. My reasoning was perfectly aligned with the boring, rigid accountant persona he despised. It made total sense to him that I would be terrified of a tax penalty. He finally exhaled, his arrogant confidence restoring itself. "Fine," Bradley agreed, standing up from the sofa. "Tomorrow at 3. But no delays, Lauren. We execute the agreement and we close this chapter." I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes fixed on the forged document in my lap. I agreed entirely. Tomorrow at 3, we would execute an agreement and a chapter would permanently close. But he had no idea he was the one being written out of the story. The next afternoon, at exactly 2:45, I stepped off the private elevator into the expansive reception area of Montgomery and Pierce, a premier law firm occupying the top floor of a prominent downtown Chicago skyscraper. The air up here smelled of expensive leather and absolute power. I was ushered into their largest glass-walled conference room, a space designed for hostile corporate takeovers and high-stakes mediations. A massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room. I took my seat at the far end, placing my sleek briefcase deliberately in front of me. At 2:55, the heavy glass doors swung open, and Bradley marched in. He was wearing his best tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, radiating the aggressive confidence of an executive who believed he had just successfully navigated a massive crisis. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side like heavily armed bodyguards were his parents. Sylvia carried her quilted Chanel bag like a shield, her chin tilted upward in a display of supreme arrogance. His father, a retired executive who had taught Bradley everything he knew about ruthless entitlement, offered me a brisk, entirely dismissive nod. Bradley had brought them to serve as his witness and his intimidation squad. He wanted to ensure I felt completely outnumbered and isolated when I signed away my financial future. Lauren Darling Bradley said, his voice dripping with fabricated sympathy, as he took the seat directly across from me. His parents sat on either side of him, forming a unified front. "I am so glad you are being pragmatic about this. My attorneys have the final paperwork ready. We just need your signature on the liability clauses, and we can put this entire terrible ordeal behind us." Sylvia leaned forward, her eyes flashing with vindictive triumph. "It is the only sensible choice, Lauren. Bradley needs to protect the family assets from that deranged assistant in Dubai. We appreciate you finally acting like a supportive partner." I kept my hands resting calmly on the mahogany table. I did not reach for the expensive pen Bradley pushed toward me. I did not look at the thick stack of legal documents his attorney was currently sliding across the polished wood. Instead, I glanced at my watch. It was exactly 3:00. "We are missing a few crucial signatures to execute this agreement, Bradley," I said, my voice entirely devoid of the trembling fragility I had displayed the night before. Bradley frowned, a flicker of genuine irritation breaking through his polished facade. "What are you talking about?" "The asset separation only requires our signatures. We do not need any further delays." The heavy glass doors of the conference room opened again. Jamal walked in. He wore a sharp black suit, carrying a heavy encrypted laptop under his arm. His expression was completely unreadable, a wall of pure analytical focus. He walked straight over to my side of the table and took the seat directly to my right, setting his laptop down with a definitive thud. Bradley's eyes darted toward his brother-in-law, his confusion rapidly morphing into visible anxiety. He knew exactly how intelligent Jamal was. He knew Jamal possessed the kind of deep cybersecurity expertise that could dismantle complex digital networks in a matter of seconds. Jamal Bradley asked, his voice tightening with a sudden edge of panic, "What are you doing here? This is a private legal meeting regarding my marriage. You have absolutely no business being in this room." "I am here acting as an independent digital forensics consultant," Jamal replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with Bradley for a single second. "Lauren retained my services to verify the integrity of the financial assets being divided in your settlement." Sylvia slammed her hand flat against the table, her heavy rings clattering against the wood. "This is highly inappropriate." Lauren sent him away immediately. "You are intentionally complicating a very simple legal procedure out of pure spite." "The procedure is no longer simple, Sylvia," I stated, leaning back in my leather executive chair, "because the assets we are discussing today do not actually belong to you or your son." Before Bradley could demand an explanation, the glass doors opened for the third and final time. The sudden influx of people immediately sucked all the oxygen out of the expansive room. Walking through the doorway was Gregory Maxwell, the chief executive officer of Bradley's Pharmaceutical Corporation. Right behind him were three senior members of the corporate board of directors, followed closely by the company's lead internal compliance attorney. They wore grim, severe expressions. They did not look like men arriving to support a valued regional sales director. They looked like an execution squad preparing to eliminate a massive corporate liability. Bradley physically recoiled, pressing his back hard against his chair. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. His carefully constructed illusion of control completely shattered in a fraction of a second. He looked wildly from the CEO to the board members, and finally back to me. his mind desperately trying to calculate how his private divorce meeting had suddenly turned into a corporate tribunal. Gregory Bradley stammered, scrambling to stand up from his chair, his voice pitched upward in sheer, unadulterated terror. "What is going on? Why is the board of directors here? This is a private family matter." Gregory Maxwell ignored Bradley's outstretched hand. He walked directly to the head of the mahogany table, glaring at Bradley with absolute, unfiltered contempt. "Take your seat." Bradley, the CEO, commanded, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation or argument. "Your wife contacted our legal department this morning regarding an active corporate emergency. She indicated that this meeting was mandatory to prevent a massive federal liability for our entire company." Bradley collapsed back into his chair as if his legs had completely given out. His breathing became rapid and shallow. He looked at me, pure terror finally replacing the arrogant smirk he had worn for the last 6 years. His father leaned over, whispering frantically in Bradley's ear, but Bradley was completely unresponsive. He was staring blankly at the sleek briefcase resting right in front of my hands. I stood up from my chair. The submissive, easily manipulated wife was permanently dead and buried. I squared my shoulders, projecting the absolute commanding authority of a senior compliance auditor conducting a hostile corporate takedown. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." I addressed the board of directors, my voice echoing clearly across the dead silent room. "I invited you here under the strict provisions of the federal corporate whistleblower statutes. What was scheduled today as a standard marital asset separation is actually a coordinated attempt by your regional sales director to launder stolen corporate funds, destroy financial evidence, and legally insulate himself from international espionage charges." Sylvia gasped loudly, aggressively clutching her chest as if she might faint. "You lying, vindictive witch! How dare you make such insane accusations in front of his employers? Keep your voice down, Sylvia," I ordered, delivering the command with such forceful authority that she snapped her mouth shut instantly. I unlocked the brass latches on my briefcase with a sharp click. I pulled out a thick, meticulously bound dossier and dropped it heavily onto the center of the mahogany table. I looked directly into Bradley's terrified, panicking eyes. The trap had officially sprung, and he was completely surrounded with absolutely no way out. I opened the dossier and extracted the first stack of papers, sliding them across the polished wood toward Gregory Maxwell. "These are the origination documents for a $150,000 home equity line of credit secured against my primary residence. If you examine the signature on the borrower line, you will see a crude forgery of my name executed by my husband 8 months ago." Bradley jolted forward, slamming his hands onto the table. "Lauren, you are having a mental breakdown. Gregory, do not listen to her. My wife is under severe psychological distress. Sit down and remain completely silent," Gregory ordered, his voice echoing like a whip crack. I continued my presentation without breaking eye contact with the board of directors. Bradley used these stolen funds to finance a massive gambling habit at an underground syndicate and an extravagant 8-month spending spree for his public relations assistant, Sienna. When he realized he was cornered by creditors, he attempted to manipulate me into signing this divorce settlement. I tossed the separation agreement onto the table next to the forged loan. The fine print was designed to legally bind me to his fraudulent debt, ensuring I would be bankrupted while he escaped with a clean slate. Sylvia gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "That is a disgusting lie. Bradley would never do such a thing. You are fabricating this presentation because you are a jealous, bitter woman." I ignored her outburst completely. "The financial fraud is merely the prelude," I stated, turning my gaze to the pharmaceutical executives. Bradley was desperate for a massive influx of cash. To secure that payout, he leveraged his executive clearance to execute a catastrophic breach of your secure corporate servers. The lead compliance attorney leaned forward, his face turning an alarming shade of pale. What exactly did he breach? I looked at Bradley, watching him sweat through his expensive suit. He stole proprietary chemical formulas and confidential research data. He arranged to sell your intellectual property to a foreign corporate syndicate based in the United Arab Emirates for $2 million. He intended to smuggle this data alongside a quantity of lethal prescription narcotics by secretly burying a biometric lockbox inside my checked luggage during our trip to Dubai. A collective gasp ripped through the conference room. Bradley's father stood up abruptly, his face flushed purple with rage. "This is absolute defamation. You cannot come into this office and accuse my son of international drug trafficking and corporate treason without actual proof." "I do not make accusations," I replied smoothly. "I conduct professional audits, and an auditor always brings receipts." I turned to Jamal, giving him a swift nod. Jamal tapped a single key on his encrypted laptop. He had connected his device directly into the conference room's audio-visual system. The speakers mounted in the ceiling immediately hummed to life. "What you are about to hear," I explained, "is an unedited recording captured inside our Dubai hotel suite just hours after his assistant Sienna was arrested at customs." Bradley had just finished lying to the local detectives on speakerphone. This was his subsequent conversation with me. Jamal hit play. Bradley's voice boomed from the overhead speakers, utterly filling the cavernous space. The audio was pristine, capturing the aggressive, vicious tone he had used while pinning me against the hotel wall. "Yes, I was sleeping with her. So what? She was a convenient distraction, a naive little idiot who thought she was going to become the wife of a pharmaceutical executive. She meant absolutely nothing to me. But she got sloppy. She got caught with that black case, and now she is trying to drag me down to save herself. I am not letting some 26-year-old assistant destroy my empire. She took the risk carrying that bag, and now she takes the fall. That is how the world works." The board members stared in absolute horror. Sylvia covered her mouth with trembling hands, her eyes wide with shock as her son's cruelty echoed around her. But the recording was not over. "I did what I had to do to secure our financial future," Bradley's recorded voice snarled. "The pharmaceutical board passed me over for the promotion I deserved. I built that company, Lauren. They owed me millions. That data was my leverage, my golden ticket to a massive payout here in the Emirates. The pills were just a sweetener for the buyers. I hid it in your luggage because your record is spotless. You are invisible to customs. It was a flawless plan until you managed to lose the case and that stupid girl ended up with it." Jamal paused the playback, letting the final sentence hang in the air. The room went dead silent. It was the suffocating silence that follows a massive structural collapse. No one moved an inch. No one took a breath. The air conditioning hummed faintly, amplifying the sheer devastation of the moment. Bradley was completely destroyed. He sat slumped in his leather chair, his arrogant posture fully shattered. His hands trembled uncontrollably on his lap. He looked like a hollow shell of a man. His voice had explicitly confessed to multiple federal felonies, corporate espionage, infidelity, and a calculated willingness to sacrifice his assistant and his wife to foreign authorities. His mother, Sylvia, lowered her hands from her pale face. She turned to look at her golden child, the son she had fiercely defended and enabled for decades. For the first time in her entire life, she saw him exactly for what he truly was: a monster. Gregory Maxwell removed his glasses, placing them onto the mahogany table with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked at the compliance attorney, communicating an entire strategic corporate response without speaking a single word. The pharmaceutical empire had just confirmed a catastrophic internal breach, and they were staring directly at the culprit. I stood at the end of the table, feeling the suffocating weight of a 6-year marriage lifting from my shoulders. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the projector above us. But the prosecution was not over. I had promised to deliver a flawless audit of my husband's criminal enterprise, and the final piece of evidence had yet to be presented. I gave Jamal a second sharp nod. Jamal typed a rapid sequence of commands onto his laptop. The massive flat screen mounted on the conference room wall flickered to life. The audio interface vanished, replaced immediately by a complex cascade of digital financial records. Jamal stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, taking command of the room with the precise, intimidating authority of a veteran cybersecurity expert. "What you are looking at is a direct, unfiltered mirror of Bradley's dark web communication logs and his subsequent offshore banking activity," Jamal explained to the stunned board of directors. He used a laser pointer to highlight a specific, heavily encrypted block of text. My sister-in-law and I intercepted his network traffic using his own malicious keylogger. This specific thread details his active negotiation with a known corporate syndicate operating out of the United Arab Emirates. He agreed to transfer your proprietary research data in exchange for a $2 million deposit. He utilized your corporate network to conduct these treasonous negotiations. Jamal clicked a button and the screen transitioned to a high-resolution capture of banking routing numbers. Here is the undeniable proof of execution. Jamal continued tapping the laser pointer against a highlighted red column of digits. This is an offshore shell account registered in the Cayman Islands under an entity Bradley established exactly 6 months ago. The timestamp on this inbound international wire transfer for $2 million perfectly aligns with the exact hour he accessed your restricted corporate servers to copy the chemical formulas onto that hard drive. The lead compliance attorney shot out of his chair, his eyes glued to the screen. He pulled out his phone, frantically taking photos of the projected routing numbers. The sheer scale of the breach was catastrophic for the pharmaceutical company, but having the exact location of the stolen funds handed to them gave the corporation an immediate tactical advantage. They now had the digital roadmap required to freeze the offshore accounts and reclaim their stolen assets. Bradley began to hyperventilate. He clutched his chest, his breathing tearing through the quiet room in ragged, desperate gasps. His tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big as he visibly shrank under the crushing weight of the projected evidence. He looked wildly toward his parents, seeking the unconditional shelter and blind defense they had provided him for his entire life. "Dad, please," Bradley choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward his father across the mahogany table. "You have to help me fix this. We can hire international lawyers. We can fight the digital evidence in court. Tell them it was a highly sophisticated hack." His father physically recoiled, pulling his leather executive chair violently away from his son, as if Bradley were suddenly highly contagious. The older man looked at the illuminated screen, then at the forged loan documents resting on the table, and finally at the broken, pathetic shell of the boy he had raised. The realization was absolute and deeply horrifying. His son was not a victim of circumstance. He was a manipulative, treacherous criminal who had recklessly endangered his own family, destroyed his loyal wife, and incinerated his entire future out of pure greed. "I cannot help you," his father said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth or paternal affection. "You forged legal documents. You stole millions from your employer. You tried to frame your own innocent wife for international drug trafficking. You are a disgrace, Bradley. You are entirely on your own." Sylvia began to weep. The arrogant, imposing matriarch who had marched onto my porch and demanded I empty my retirement accounts was completely gone. She buried her face in her trembling hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the perfect, pristine image of her golden child burned to ashes right in front of her eyes. She did not offer a single word of defense. She knew there was absolutely no defense left to offer. The monster she created had finally been unmasked. Gregory Maxwell slammed his hand onto the table, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He pointed a lethal, unyielding finger directly at Bradley. "Bradley, you are hereby terminated from this corporation, effective immediately." The CEO declared, his voice vibrating with controlled, absolute fury. "Your executive clearance is revoked as of this second. Your stock options are permanently canceled. Your corporate pension is frozen pending the full recovery of our stolen assets. Our legal department will be filing a massive civil suit against you to reclaim every single penny of the damages you have caused this company. You are completely finished in this industry." The reality of his total destruction finally crashed down on Bradley. He had lost his devoted wife, his massive offshore payout, his lucrative career, and the blind loyalty of his enabling parents in the span of 15 agonizing minutes. Panic seized him entirely. His biological survival instinct overrode any remaining shred of logical thought. He bolted upward, his heavy chair crashing backward onto the plush carpet. He scrambled away from the conference table, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy glass doors. He thought he could run. He actually believed he could sprint out of this corporate building, disappear into the crowded Chicago streets, and somehow evade the massive federal net that had already closed tightly around him. He took 3 massive, desperate strides toward the exit, his hand reaching out for the brass handle. Before his fingers could even touch the metal, the heavy glass doors swung forcefully inward. Bradley stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing as a highly coordinated team of federal agents breached the conference room. Agent Harrison led the squad, his gold badge prominently displayed on his belt, his expression radiating absolute unflinching authority. 3 heavily armed agents filed in seamlessly behind him, instantly securing the perimeter and physically blocking the only exit. Bradley froze, his eyes darting wildly between the tactical agents and the conference table. The trap had slammed completely shut. There was no escape. Bradley Agent Harrison stated, his voice echoing with the full weight and power of the federal government. "You are under arrest." An agent stepped forward, quickly grabbing Bradley by the shoulders and forcefully spinning him around. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Bradley's wrists sliced through the silent room. It was a sharp, brilliant sound of absolute poetic justice. "You are being charged with severe multiple violations of federal law." Agent Harrison continued reading the charges with methodical, terrifying precision. "We have secured warrants for your arrest regarding international corporate espionage, massive wire fraud, money laundering, and the international trafficking of Class A narcotics. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Bradley did not say a single word. He could not. He stood there in his expensive tailored suit, his hands bound tightly behind his back, staring blankly at the floor. The charismatic pharmaceutical executive was dead. He was now just another federal inmate facing decades behind bars. The agents patted him down, efficiently confiscating his phone, his keys, and his wallet. Agent Harrison looked across the mahogany table, making direct eye contact with me. He offered a single, highly respectful nod, acknowledging the flawless execution of our trap. I returned the gesture, maintaining my calm, professional posture. "Take him out," Harrison ordered. The agents marched Bradley out through the glass doors. He did not look back at his weeping mother. He did not look back at his furious father or his devastated CEO. And he certainly did not look back at me. I watched him disappear down the carpeted hallway, flanked by federal authorities, walking straight into the dark, unforgiving future he had so meticulously engineered for himself. The corporate conference room fell silent once again, but this time the silence was not suffocating. It was the clear, refreshing sound of absolute freedom. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system took over from there, processing my husband with the exact same ruthless efficiency he had used to exploit others. The legal proceedings were an absolute bloodbath for him. Bradley hired a team of aggressive, highly expensive defense attorneys who promised to spin the narrative, but they hit an impenetrable wall. The digital evidence Jamal and I had meticulously curated left absolutely zero room for reasonable doubt. The prosecution had the offshore bank routing numbers, the forged mortgage documents, the dark web chat logs, and the crystal-clear audio recording of his own arrogant confession. Realizing he had absolutely no leverage and facing the terrifying prospect of multiple consecutive life sentences, Bradley's arrogant facade completely shattered. He accepted a global plea deal to avoid a public trial that would have only amplified his humiliation. Standing in the federal courthouse, stripped of his tailored suits and wearing standard-issue detention clothing, he looked pathetic and small. The federal judge showed absolutely no mercy to a wealthy executive who endangered his own wife and orchestrated international drug trafficking for pure corporate greed. Bradley was sentenced to a mandatory 15 years in federal prison without any possibility of early parole. The man who wanted to build a global empire was permanently reduced to an inmate number in a high-security penitentiary. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Sienna faced the severe, unforgiving reality of the United Arab Emirates justice system. Her curated influencer dreams evaporated the moment the heavy metal doors of a Dubai holding cell slammed shut. She was terrified, isolated, and facing a potential life sentence for narcotics smuggling. However, because she fully cooperated with international authorities and officially named Bradley as the sole mastermind of the operation, her sentence was dramatically reduced. She accepted a strict plea deal and was sentenced to 5 hard years behind bars. She would spend the rest of her 20s sitting in a foreign prison, an incredibly brutal consequence for choosing stolen luxury and a toxic affair over basic morality. The collateral damage completely decimated Bradley's enabling parents. Sylvia and her husband adamantly refused to accept their golden child's undeniable guilt. Driven by blind delusional loyalty, they decided to fight the federal government. They liquidated their entire life savings to fund Bradley's futile legal defense. They took out massive loans against their sprawling suburban estate, drained their retirement portfolios, and burned through every liquid asset they possessed to pay elite defense lawyers who ultimately lost the case. Adding to their absolute misery, Bradley's former pharmaceutical corporation filed a massive civil lawsuit against him for corporate sabotage and intellectual property theft. Since Bradley's personal assets were seized by the federal government, the crushing financial ruin spilled directly onto his parents. They were forced into sudden bankruptcy. They had to sell their beautiful home at a massive loss and relocate to a cramped, outdated apartment on the outskirts of the city. Sylvia's collection of quilted designer bags and expensive jewelry was auctioned off to pay utility bills and lingering legal fees. Their affluent social circle completely abandoned them, treating them like toxic pariahs. They lost absolutely everything because they chose to protect a monster. While their entire world burned to the ground, my life was beautifully and methodically rebuilt. My divorce proceedings were seamless and entirely one-sided. With Bradley convicted of federal fraud and forgery, the family court judge immediately invalidated the home equity loan in my name. The bank was forced to absorb the loss and pursue Bradley's frozen estate for the remaining balance. I retained 100% of my personal assets, my pristine retirement funds, and the full equity of the Chicago townhouse. But I did not stay in that house. I sold the property for a substantial profit, eager to permanently sever my final tie to that dark chapter of my life. Jamal and I recognized that our combined professional skills created an incredibly powerful dynamic. A senior financial compliance auditor and a master cybersecurity architect made for a lethal combination against corporate fraud. We pooled our resources and officially launched our own boutique risk management consulting firm. We specialized in investigating high-level executive embezzlement, digital espionage, and complex asset recovery. Within 6 months, our firm was highly sought after by Fortune 500 companies across the country. Jamal managed the digital infiltration and network security, while I handled the forensic accounting and legal compliance. We became incredibly successful, operating with absolute autonomy and commanding top-tier retainers. We turned the exact skills we used to take down Bradley into a highly lucrative, completely independent empire. Tonight, I am sitting on the expansive balcony of my brand-new penthouse apartment, overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago. The cool night air feels exhilarating against my skin. I hold a glass of expensive red wine, swirling the dark liquid, while watching the city lights reflect off the dark waters of Lake Michigan. I am 33 years old, entirely self-sufficient, completely unburdened, and radiantly happy. I did not just survive my husband's vicious betrayal. I used his own arrogance to build my absolute freedom. People often say that marriage is built entirely on trust, but as a professional auditor, I know the real truth. Never trust what you cannot independently verify. A locked case does not signify love or protection, it signifies deception. Sometimes the most dangerous threats do not come from strangers in dark alleys. They come from the person sleeping right beside you, hiding their true nature behind a charismatic smile. Have you ever discovered a partner's dark secret in the most unexpected way? How did you uncover their lies? Share your own stories in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of surviving betrayal and claiming your ultimate revenge. The chilling narrative of Lauren and Bradley serves as a masterclass in a crucial life lesson: the inherent danger of blind trust and the absolute necessity of independent verification. In romantic relationships, society often conditions us to believe that unconditional trust is the sole foundation of a healthy marriage. However, this story shatters that illusion, demonstrating how a charismatic facade can easily mask profound deception and criminal intent. Bradley weaponized his wife's spotless background and innocent demeanor, attempting to use her as an unwitting mule for lethal narcotics and stolen corporate data. He banked heavily on the arrogant assumption that a devoted spouse would never question a locked case, a sudden surge of luxurious spending, or his erratic behavior. Lauren's ultimate triumph was not born out of emotional hysterics, but rather her refusal to let blind love override her professional intuition and logic. When she noticed the subtle weight discrepancy in her luggage, she didn't just ask her husband about it. She meticulously investigated, bypassed his biometric lock using graphite powder and tape, and uncovered the horrifying truth. Instead of reacting impulsively, she partnered with her brother-in-law Jamal to trace offshore wire transfers and keylogger scripts, building an airtight federal case. The lesson here is profound. True security does not come from leaning blindly on a partner's promises, but from maintaining your own awareness, financial independence, and critical thinking. Lauren survived because she trusted her own instincts over her husband's lies. Her journey reminds us that while love requires trust, self-preservation demands verification. We must remain vigilant and grounded in our own capabilities, ensuring we are never reduced to mere pawns in someone else's selfish game. If you found this reflection empowering, please share it with others who might need a reminder to always trust their intuition and verify the truth.